Have you ever felt like something inside you is missing, but you can't explain what? Like a part of you got left behind somewhere along the way, and no matter what you do, you can't seem to feel complete. Maybe it shows up in quiet moments when you're lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering why you feel disconnected, even when everything looks fine on the outside. The truth is, most people are walking through life feeling like puzzle pieces that don't quite fit. They've buried their past, rejected parts of themselves, and silenced their emotions just to get through the day. But deep down, there's a voice whispering, there has to be more than this, and that voice is right. Because wholeness isn't something that's out there. It's not something you need to earn, find, or fix. It's already inside you, waiting to be remembered. And tonight, you're going to learn how Buddhism helps bring you back to that inner home. In this video, you'll discover the teachings, the reflections, and the silent wisdom that can reconnect you with the part of yourself you thought was lost forever. This isn't just spiritual theory. These are real practices, real insights that can help you stop feeling broken and start feeling whole. So before we begin, I want you to make a quiet promise to yourself. Type in the comments, starting tonight, I return to myself. I am whole. You're not just writing a sentence, you're waking something up. The more you say it, the more your heart will believe it, and the more your healing begins. Write it now, and let's begin. Now that you've made the choice to return to yourself, to stop chasing pieces and start becoming whole again, it's time to begin where the pain quietly began. Not on the surface, but deeper. At the place where parts of the self were exiled. Not forgotten, but hidden. Hidden by shame. Covered by regret. Silenced by fear. This is where we begin. Not by fixing, not by fighting, but by finally seeing. The most healing kind of seeing there is. There's a pain that doesn't scream. It doesn't break things or cry out for help. It just waits in silence. And most people walk through their entire lives with that silence tucked somewhere behind their eyes, pretending they've moved on. But deep inside, something still hurts. Not because of what happened, but because of what never got welcomed back. In Buddhism, this is where self-compassion becomes more than kindness. It becomes a path home. Not a soft, fluffy love, but the kind of compassion that sits beside the pain without turning away. Most people try to escape what they don't like about themselves. The mistakes, the embarrassing moments, the behaviors they regret. They build a version of themselves that looks better, sounds smarter, acts stronger, and they wear it like armor. But underneath it all, there are disowned parts, left out because they didn't fit the image. Buddhism teaches something radical. Those parts don't need to be fixed. They need to be seen, heard, held. That is the practice. This isn't therapy, it's presence. It's the quiet realization that nothing inside you is broken. The shame that keeps resurfacing when you remember what you did back then. It's not a monster. It's an exile. It's a younger version of you that's still trying to explain why it did what it did, but no one's been willing to listen. Self-compassion in Buddhism is not a luxury. It's a lifeline. It says, I will sit with the part of me that others rejected, even if it makes me uncomfortable. This is not weakness. This is power. There is a Buddhist teaching that suffering begins not from what happens, but from our resistance to what is. That includes the parts of ourselves we try to silence. Every time you say, "I shouldn't have done that," or "I can't believe I was that person," you're creating a wall between who you are and who you were. But Buddhism invites you to take that wall down, not with force, but with warmth. By meeting that version of yourself and saying, "I know why you did what you did. I see the pain, I see the confusion, and I'm not here to punish you anymore." This is where wholeness starts to form again. When you stop exiling parts of yourself just because they made mistakes. When you realize that the worst version of you was still trying, still breathing, still hoping to be loved. It doesn't matter how many years it's been. There's no expiration date on healing. The mind holds on to what hasn't been acknowledged. So, if something from 10 years ago still haunts you, it's not because you haven't moved on, it's because you've never gone back to bring that version of yourself forward. That's what Buddhist self-compassion teaches. We don't heal by forgetting. We heal by integrating. One of the most beautiful practices is sitting in meditation, not to quiet the mind, but to let it speak. To let the memories come, and instead of pushing them away, meeting them with the soft gaze of the heart. Not judging, not analyzing, just seeing. You'll be surprised at what happens when you look at a painful memory with kindness instead of rejection. It changes shape. It stops being a wound and starts becoming a story you're finally willing to hear without turning your face. There's a teaching that says, the mind creates the world. If that's true, then the mind can also recreate the self. Not by inventing something new, but by welcoming what has been left out. Sometimes we fear that if we accept the darker parts of ourselves, we're saying they were okay. But acceptance is not approval, it's awareness, it's understanding, it's saying, that part of me acted from pain, not from evil. And that is where the heart begins to open again. Some people think compassion is a soft emotion, but real compassion, especially toward yourself, is fierce. It doesn't run away from the truth. It holds the truth in its hands without flinching. In Buddhist practice, metta, loving kindness, is a powerful tool. But it doesn't mean sending love only to the good parts. It means sitting in meditation and saying to the part of yourself that you're most ashamed of, "May you be safe. May you be happy. May you be at peace." Over and over again, until the shame doesn't fight back anymore, until it sighs and softens and rests. This kind of practice isn't always peaceful. Sometimes you cry. Sometimes you feel tightness in your chest. Sometimes memories come up that you didn't expect. But that's not a sign it isn't working. That's the pain leaving the body. That's the part of you that's been locked away, starting to believe it might be safe to come out again. Buddhist teacher Tara Brach often talks about radical acceptance. Not the kind that says, "Oh well, it happened," but the kind that says, "I see all of it, and I'm staying with it." That's where healing begins. Not when you try to get rid of what hurts, but when you sit beside it with quiet presence and say, "I'm here now. I'm not leaving you behind again." One of the deepest lessons in Buddhism is that the self isn't a fixed thing. It's a flowing river of experience. And yet, sometimes, we dam up certain parts. We say, that version of me doesn't deserve to flow forward. But everything changes when you realize that even the worst version of you was doing the best it could with the awareness it had at the time. This isn't an excuse. It's an understanding. And from understanding, the wall between now and then begins to melt. In Buddhist psychology, suffering comes from aversion, pushing away what is painful. But wholeness comes from embracing what has been pushed away. If you feel disconnected, it's not because something's wrong with you. It's because parts of you have been waiting to be acknowledged. The part that felt abandoned, the part that made the mistake, the part that lashed out, the part that broke down. None of them want to be in control. They just want to be seen. And once they are, they stop trying so hard to get your attention through pain. This is why Buddhist compassion is so powerful. It doesn't try to fix. It doesn't try to change what happened. It meets it with presence. The more you sit with your pain without trying to remove it, the more it changes shape on its own. Not because you forced it, but because you gave it space to breathe. Pain that is met with love does not stay the same. There's a moment in every healing journey where you realize that your past doesn't need to be rewritten. It just needs to be remembered differently, not with hatred, not with judgment, but with understanding. When you can look at a younger version of yourself and say, "You were scared, you were alone, and I forgive you," something inside you clicks back into place. And that click, that quiet click, is the sound of wholeness returning. You don't need a new personality. You don't need to rebuild yourself from scratch. You are not a house that needs to be torn down and rebuilt. You're a house that's always been whole, but had rooms locked away. Rooms full of memories, rooms full of fears, rooms full of versions of you that were too loud, too sad, too confused. And now, with the key of self-compassion, you are unlocking those doors, not to judge what's inside, but to turn the lights back on. Some doors creak when they open. Some resist. That's okay. You don't have to rush. Buddhist practice is not about speed. It's about sincerity. Every time you sit in stillness and welcome what arises, you're restoring something ancient. You're saying to your own heart, "I'm ready to listen now." And hearts have been waiting for centuries to hear those words. What does it mean to feel whole again? It means there's nothing inside you you're trying to run from. It means you can sit in silence without feeling like you're about to be chased by a memory. It means you trust yourself enough to feel everything without falling apart. That kind of trust is rare, but it's possible. It begins not with a grand decision, but with a quiet breath and a choice to stay. Every scar you carry tells a story, but not all stories are meant to end in pain. Some are meant to become lessons, and some, when viewed through the eyes of compassion, become sacred. Not because the pain was beautiful, but because the healing is. When you stop trying to erase your past and start listening to it, you turn wounds into wisdom. The parts of you that still hurt, they're not weak. They're waiting for the day you stop abandoning them, waiting for the day you come back, not with shame, but with warmth. That day can be tonight, right now, in this quiet moment, under this soft light. You can start to say to yourself what no one ever said when you needed it most. You're still worthy, even now, especially now. You don't need to be perfect to be whole. You just need to stop pretending that wholeness means perfection. In Buddhism, wholeness means nothing left out. And that includes the you who doubted, who failed, who hurt others, who was hurt. They're all part of the story, and the story is still being written. This is not a journey of becoming someone else. It's a return, a remembering, a reunion, not with a better version of yourself, but with the one who's been waiting in silence, ready to be seen, ready to be loved, ready to come home. After returning to the parts of ourselves we had abandoned, after sitting with them and offering the kind of compassion that doesn't ask for change but simply presence, something strange begins to happen, a soft unraveling. The version of ourselves we've been defending, editing, hiding, begins to loosen its grip. The stories start to feel less solid, the emotions start to flow more freely, and then something even more unfamiliar arrives. Space, silence, emptiness. And for most people, that's where the panic sets in. Because when the noise disappears, they think something is missing. But what if that emptiness is not the absence of self, but the beginning of wholeness? There is a teaching in Buddhism so powerful it has frightened minds for centuries and yet quietly healed them in ways nothing else could. It's the teaching of emptiness, not emptiness as despair, not as hollowness or numbness, but as shunyata, the ultimate truth that everything we cling to is without a permanent, fixed identity. And while that may sound terrifying to the mind that wants to be someone, it is pure liberation to the heart that wants to be free. Most people carry their identities like armor. I am this. I am not that. This is what happened to me. This is what I became. But underneath it all, there's a whisper of exhaustion, because holding on is heavy. The more tightly one grips the idea of who they are, the more life feels like a battle. But when one begins to loosen that grip, not by force but by insight, something opens. The belief that one must be a certain way, achieve a certain goal, or overcome a certain flaw begins to dissolve. Not into nothingness, but into a kind of fullness that can't be explained, only felt. That is the paradox of shunyata. When you stop clinging to form, form becomes light. When you stop needing identity to be solid, you become free to move through life like water. There's a subtle trap hidden in the spiritual path, the belief that wholeness comes from building a better self, a more peaceful self, a more mindful self. But this subtle striving is still clinging. It still depends on the illusion that there is a fixed you who must be repaired. Shunyata whispers something much more radical. There is no fixed self to improve. There is only experience arising and passing, feelings coming and going, thoughts appearing and dissolving. And when this is deeply seen, not as philosophy, but as reality, there is a lightness that no success or achievement could ever bring. People are afraid of emptiness because they think it means being nobody. But what's being offered is not erasure, it's spaciousness, the space to be fully alive without the constant pressure to perform, define, and control. In the light of shunyata, emotions are allowed to flow through like wind through a tree. They no longer become who you are. Anger comes, stays, and leaves. Sadness rises, teaches, and fades. Joy visits, glows, and moves on. There's no clinging to them, and so there's no suffering in their departure. This emptiness is not cold. It's the opposite. It's warm because it has no need to judge. Without a fixed identity to defend, the heart becomes like a sky that welcomes every kind of weather. There's nothing to protect, so everything can be seen. It's not the death of self, it's the death of false certainty. The certainty that you must always be happy, that you must always know, that you must always be right. In emptiness, there's no one left to be embarrassed, because there's no performance left to uphold. Some misunderstand shunyata and think it means detachment from life. But in reality, it is the deepest intimacy with life. Without clinging, you can finally touch things fully. You can listen without needing to reply. You can love without needing to possess. You can cry without needing to explain. Because there is no self to protect. Just awareness, awake and free, moving through each moment like a gentle wind through tall grass. This realization doesn't come from thinking about it. It comes from sitting with silence long enough to see what arises when the mind is not constantly being fed. And what arises, at first, may be discomfort, because the mind will scream for something to hold on to, a label, a plan, a memory, a goal. But if you can sit through that screaming, if you can just breathe and watch, you begin to see what's behind the noise. And what's behind it is not more content, it's clarity. Spacious, open, kind clarity. It takes courage to not immediately fill the space, to not reach for the next distraction. But in that space, healing happens, because the mind is no longer trying to fix anything. It's not trying to be anything, it's just here. And being here, fully and quietly, is where the illusion of separation ends. Not just separation from others, but separation from life itself. When there's no longer a rigid self standing apart, life flows into you, and you flow into it. And that flow feels like wholeness. Shunyata does not erase the world. It reveals its texture. Without the constant filter of ego, things become vivid. Tea tastes more alive. The wind feels more direct. A friend's words land more deeply. Life is no longer being filtered through, what does this mean for me? It is simply seen, heard, felt, fully. And in that full experience, the need to label or grasp disappears, because the moment itself is enough. There is a reason why many Buddhist masters speak more in silence than in words. It's not because they don't know what to say. It's because what they've realized cannot be spoken. Not because it's too complex, but because words are too solid. And shunyata is not solid. It's spacious, it moves, it breathes, it holds everything but clings to nothing. And to live from that place is not to become distant from the world, it is to become one with it. When the idea of self drops away, compassion becomes natural, not as a strategy, not as a moral code, but as an effortless expression of connectedness. You don't need to force yourself to be kind. You see others suffering and you feel it as your own. Because the boundary between me and you has softened. In emptiness, love is not personal. It is vast. It does not depend on liking. It does not need to be earned. It flows simply because there's no one trying to control it. Most suffering comes from clinging to opinions, to people, to outcomes, to identities. And the root of clinging is fear. Fear that without those things there will be nothing left. But when you let go, you discover that what remains is not nothing, it's presence, deep, vast, still presence. And in that presence, you find not only peace, but the strange fullness of emptiness, the wholeness that asks for nothing and gives everything. Letting go doesn't mean you lose your humanity. You still feel, you still care, but you stop building prisons out of what you feel. You stop needing everything to last forever. You stop trying to freeze moments in time, because you see the nature of all things, arising, abiding, and fading. And instead of fearing this, you begin to bow to it, because it's beautiful, because it's true. Shunyata teaches you to hold lightly, not because nothing matters, but because everything is already passing. So instead of grasping, you savor. Instead of rushing, you breathe. Instead of controlling, you bow. And in that bowing, you return to something ancient inside you, something that knows this life is not to be mastered, it is to be danced with. There's no need to become a monk or study scriptures for decades to feel this. It starts with one breath, one moment where you let go of the commentary and feel what's underneath. 1 second where you stop trying to become someone and just allow yourself to be no one in particular. That's where the doorway opens, not with effort, but with release. When thoughts come, you watch. When they go, you don't follow. When emotions rise, you feel. When they fall, you don't panic. This gentle watching is the path. And as you walk it, you begin to realize you were never broken. You were just buried under layers of noise. Now, the layers are lifting, and underneath, there is nothing missing. People often ask, "Who am I?" and search for an answer that feels solid. But the most liberating answer is silence. Not because the question doesn't matter, but because the asking dissolves when it's met with space. In that space, there's no need to be someone specific. There's only the joy of being, the raw aliveness of existing without explanation. Shunyata does not mean nothingness. It means freedom from false solidity. It means life without the heavy backpack of me, mine, I must. It means breathing without clinging, feeling without bracing, moving without resisting. And in that kind of life, everything becomes easier. Not because the world changes, but because your way of relating to it softens. You still have responsibilities, you still have goals, but they no longer define you. You can lose and not collapse. You can win and not inflate. You can rest and not feel guilty, because you know that your worth was never tied to outcomes. It was never a matter of becoming. It was always here, quiet and complete, under the surface. This is the gift of emptiness, the wholeness that was never missing, just covered. Covered by ideas, covered by effort, covered by fear, and now uncovered by silence, uncovered by release, uncovered by the simple act of no longer needing to grasp. So, if you find yourself feeling empty, do not rush to fill the space. Sit, wait, listen. You may be closer to wholeness than you've ever been, not because of what's there, but because of what you've finally let go. When the grip on identity loosens and the space of emptiness begins to expand, something unexpected starts to shift. Not just in the thoughts or emotions, but in the body itself. Breathing changes. Shoulders soften. A knot once held in the belly begins to melt. it becomes clear that the mind wasn't the only one clinging. The body was holding on too. Tension, fatigue, restlessness, these aren't random. They're echoes of thoughts left unprocessed, emotions left unspoken. And this is where the next layer of wholeness unfolds, not through further silence, but through reunion. Because the journey back to yourself can never be complete until you stop treating the body and mind as two separate things. There's a strange belief that has been passed down through culture and habit that the body is just a container, a shell, a thing to carry the real essence, the mind. But this belief quietly damages people. It teaches them to ignore pain, to override exhaustion, to punish the body when it doesn't perform, and to mistrust its signals. Over time, people begin living like floating heads, cut off from the chest, the belly, the skin, the breath. Buddhism, however, teaches the opposite. It reminds us that there is no clear line between the mind and the body. They are not two things. They are one field of experience, flowing together, responding to each other, shaping each other. And healing begins the moment you stop dividing what was never meant to be split. In the Buddhist teachings, especially in mindfulness practice, attention to the body is not a side exercise. It is the foundation, because every emotion is felt somewhere in the body. Anger has heat, sadness has weight, fear has tension. Even joy has its own rhythm and movement. If the mind is a sky, the body is the weather that makes it visible. And yet, most people try to think their way out of suffering. They use logic to solve what is somatic. They talk to their thoughts while their muscles scream for attention. This is why so many feel stuck. Not because their insights are wrong, but because their healing hasn't yet reached their skin. Wholeness begins when awareness drops below the neck, when it starts visiting the shoulders, the jaw, the gut, when breath becomes more than a background function and starts becoming a conversation. In mindfulness of the body, every sensation is honored. Tingling, tightness, pressure, warmth. None of it is accidental. All of it is communication. And when you listen, not just as a mind, but as a whole being, you begin to realize that your body has been speaking this entire time. The silence was never on its end, it was on yours. There is a reason the Buddha always began meditation instruction with awareness of the breath, not as a trick for calm, but as a path to presence. The breath sits at the bridge of mind and body. It is shaped by thought, yet felt in the lungs. It is unconscious, yet trainable. It is always happening in the present. And when you focus on the breath, not to control it, but to know it, you begin stepping back into unity, not as an idea, but as a direct experience. There is no need to force the body to feel anything special. In fact, forcing is the very energy that deepens the split. The invitation is simply to notice, to watch what happens when you sit quietly and let your body show you its truths. Maybe you notice a pulsing in the hands, a tightness behind the eyes, a gentle pressure in the feet. You don't analyze, you don't label, you simply greet it all as part of you. Not a problem, not a puzzle, just presence. In Buddhist psychology, the idea of embodied awareness is essential, because awareness that lives only in the intellect becomes detached, fragile, reactive. It flattens experience into concepts. But awareness that drops into the body becomes stable, warm, grounded. It no longer rushes to conclusions. It starts to feel the moment instead of judging it. That is where wisdom begins, not in having the right answers, but in being so fully present with what is that the questions dissolve on their own. Trauma, too, reveals the importance of embodiment. When something painful happens and the mind cannot process it, the body stores it. This is why people often feel anxiety in the stomach, or grief in the chest, or fear in the spine. These are not metaphors, they are biological truths, and no amount of mental clarity will erase them. They must be felt, witnessed, held, not once, but again and again, with patience and care. Buddhism does not bypass pain, it sits with it, breath by breath, until the tension slowly unwinds. There is a deep power in learning to inhabit the body without trying to fix it, to simply be with your own muscles, your own weight, your own pulse, and to say, "This too is me." Not the polished version, not the spiritualized version, but the raw, tired, aching, buzzing aliveness that moves under the skin. This kind of acceptance breaks the spell of separation. It restores what the world taught you to disconnect from. Even movement becomes a form of meditation when the mind and body reunite. Walking slowly, feeling the contact of feet on earth, lifting, moving, placing. Each step becomes a moment of union, not a means to get somewhere, but a way to return to this breath, this body, this step. The practice of walking meditation is not about slowness, it's about intimacy. And intimacy cannot happen when you're divided. Food, too, is transformed by presence, not just what you eat, but how. When the mind is elsewhere, meals become mechanical. The body eats, but is not nourished. But when you pause, breathe, taste, chew, and truly feel the act of receiving nourishment, digestion becomes more than a physical process. It becomes a sacred one. The same is true with rest, with sleep, with touch, with every act that involves the body. When done with awareness, it stops being routine and becomes ritual. Many suffer from illnesses that seem invisible: fatigue, inflammation, tension, anxiety. But behind these symptoms is often the same root: disconnection, a body left unheard, a mind left ungrounded. And the healing is not always in medication or in mental reframing. Sometimes it begins with 5 slow breaths. Sometimes with a hand placed gently on the heart. Sometimes with the simple words, "I'm listening now." The body is not a burden. It is a gate, a doorway into the deepest forms of presence. When you stop treating it like a problem and start treating it like a partner, everything shifts. Pain becomes softer, pleasure becomes deeper, movement becomes grace, stillness becomes medicine, because now you're not living as a split being, you're living as one. Even posture matters, not as performance, but as message. The way you sit, stand, walk, each sends a signal to the mind. Upright without rigidity, relaxed without collapse. This is the middle way, not just in thought, but in structure. The body becomes a living expression of balance, of dignity, of openness. And the mind, seeing this, begins to reflect the same. Buddhist teachings speak of the body as a temple. But this doesn't mean it must be flawless or pristine. It means it is sacred because it is transient, because it will change, because it will age, because it will one day return to the earth. And so, each breath becomes a bow, each sensation an offering, each moment of awareness a return to the altar of now. One of the most healing practices in this path is the body scan meditation, not for relaxation, though that may happen, but for reconnection, bringing attention area by area to every part of the body, from the toes to the crown, with no goal but presence, no judgment, no fixing, just meeting each area like an old friend. Some parts may feel tense, others dull, others alive. All are welcome. All are part of the reunion. Gratitude arises not from forced affirmation, but from contact. When you truly feel the lungs working, the hands holding, the legs carrying, the heart beating, you begin to see just how much life is happening without your control. And in that realization, gratitude flows, not as obligation, but as awe. The body, despite all it has endured, is still showing up, still breathing, still listening for your return. Sleep deepens when the body is trusted. Pain eases when it is not judged. Anxiety fades when breath becomes home. These are not spiritual theories, they are lived truths, and they begin not with massive effort, but with simple noticing. The rise and fall of the belly, the air touching the skin, the sound of the breath moving through the nose. These are doors, always open, always waiting. Even emotions that feel overwhelming become more manageable when anchored in the body. Instead of spiraling into thought, you learn to ask, where is this felt? And you breathe there, and you soften there. And slowly, the storm passes, not because you controlled it, but because you stayed with it. And it realized it didn't need to scream anymore to be heard. The mind and body do not need to be forced into unity. They are already united. The illusion is that they're separate. The practice is to stop believing that illusion, to live not as a head with a machine attached to it, but as a full, breathing, sensing presence. Whole, not because everything feels good. Whole, because nothing is left out. So tonight, as you rest, as your body settles into the mattress, as your breath slows and the mind begins to drift, return to this truth. There is no distance between your thoughts and your spine, your heart and your hands, your awareness and your cells. All of it is one field, one presence, one self, not divided. As the body softens and the mind begins to rest within it, a strange kind of clarity begins to unfold. Not a mental understanding, but a quiet recognition that what once felt separate, thoughts, sensations, feelings, is now moving in rhythm. The mind is no longer hovering above life, it is inside it. And when this happens, something deeper begins to loosen. The constant voice that narrates everything starts to lose its grip. The explanations, the justifications, the inner monologue, the why and how of everything you are. And for the first time in a long time, there's a silence not only in the body, but in the story. Because true healing isn't only physical, it begins where identity no longer has to be defined by what hurt. There's something deeply exhausting about always needing a story, about always needing to explain who you are, where you came from, why you act the way you do. People tell themselves stories not just to remember the past, but to make it make sense, to feel less lost. But after a while, the story becomes a prison. Not because it's false, but because it's incomplete, and yet it's treated as final. It's repeated so many times that it begins to feel like truth. This is the story of me, the story of my pain, my survival, my failures, my identity. But Buddhism gently asks a question few people dare to ask. What happens if the story is put down? This doesn't mean forgetting the past. It means stepping outside the frame. It means no longer needing to be the hero, the victim, the broken one, or the one who overcame. It means realizing that while the past shaped you, it doesn't own you. And when you stop telling the story on loop, something rare happens. You begin to feel what's underneath the words, the raw experience that doesn't need to be named to be felt. The breath, the presence, the life that continues even when the story stops. Buddhist teachings don't reject memory, but they do invite you to see its limits. The narrative self, the part of the mind that weaves everything into meaning, is not who you are. It's a function, a storyteller, useful sometimes, but not always accurate, and certainly not always kind. Left unchecked, it turns every mistake into proof of inadequacy, every loss into identity, every experience into a role that must now be performed forever. But the truth is simpler. You are not the story. You are the awareness of the story. You are the space in which the story arises and eventually fades. Letting go of the story does not mean becoming indifferent. It means becoming free. Free from the pressure to explain yourself. Free from the compulsion to justify why you're still hurting. Free from the need to be seen in a certain way. Most people aren't suffering from what happened. They're suffering from what they've told themselves it meant. The mind is trying to protect itself by giving pain a purpose. But sometimes pain just is. It doesn't need to be wrapped in a title. It doesn't need to be a label that follows you. This is not a denial of history. It's a return to the present. When you sit with the breath, when you feel the body rise and fall without a story attached, you realize how little is actually wrong in this moment. The past is not here. The identity is not needed. You are breathing, you are sitting, you are aware. That's enough. That's everything. And from this place, you begin to see that peace was never about fixing the past. It was about no longer dragging it through every moment like a shadow. The narrative self is loud because it wants security. It wants to know who it is. But Buddhism points to the truth that self is not fixed. It is fluid, changing, empty of solidity. And that's not frightening. It's freeing. Because if the self is not solid, then you don't have to keep defending it. You don't have to prove yourself. You don't have to hold on to pain just because it's part of the plot. You can simply live, without narration, without summary, just breath, step, sound, silence. This doesn't mean there is no learning from the past. It means the learning becomes quiet. It becomes embodied. You carry the lesson without needing the label. The story may return, but now you see it for what it is, just words, just thoughts, passing like clouds, and you, the awareness beneath them, remain untouched, unshaken. When you meet someone who no longer needs a story, there is a lightness to them. They don't try to impress. They don't try to justify. They don't interrupt their presence with explanations. They are simply there, fully. And because they are not bound to a story, they are free to change, free to respond, free to love without protecting a fragile identity. The story says, "This is who I am." Buddhism replies, "Is that so?" It's not confrontation, it's curiosity, a gentle invitation to look again, to ask, what happens when I stop repeating this? And in that gap, something timeless opens, a peace that isn't earned, a stillness that doesn't depend on resolution. It's the space that's always been underneath the plot line, waiting for you to return. You may feel grief when the story starts to dissolve. That's normal. The identity you've held on to has been your protection. It's been the way you made sense of chaos. Letting it go can feel like loss. But what you're losing is not yourself. It's the cage. And what remains is so much bigger, more open, more alive. You begin to notice how much of your energy was spent rehearsing, editing, retelling. Now that energy returns, not to a role, but to life. This isn't about having no history, it's about not being reduced to it. Not every chapter defines the whole book. Not every pain becomes a lifelong scar. Some things just happen, and then they end. And when you stop picking them back up, you give yourself space to feel something new, something unedited, something real. Meditation helps here, not because it gives you insight, but because it gives you distance. You begin to hear the story playing, and instead of following it, you watch. You say, "Ah, there's the voice again," and you return to the breath, again and again, until the voice grows quiet, not silenced by force, but by lack of attention. It's okay to still feel emotions tied to the story, but now you can feel them without being them. You can cry without becoming the one who suffers. You can feel joy without needing to turn it into a victory. Emotions pass through like rain on the roof, felt fully, gone naturally. This is the healing that comes when story loses its grip, not through amnesia, but through presence. Letting go of the story also softens relationships. You stop expecting others to play the roles you've assigned. You stop defending your part. You start seeing people as they are now, not as they were in your script. Conflict fades, compassion grows, because you're no longer trapped in a play that everyone else is tired of acting in. Sometimes the most radical act of self-love is to stop telling the story, to sit quietly, to breathe, to feel the body, and to say, "This is enough." Not because you've solved the past, but because you're no longer forcing it to be the present. The story may visit again. That's okay. You greet it like an old friend, but you don't invite it to move in. You say, "I see you, and I'm still here." That stillness, that quiet awareness, is who you really are, not the character, not the narrative, but the space that holds it all. And now, from this space, without pressure, without past, without performance, the path unfolds again, soft, steady, free. When the need for a story dissolves and identity no longer rests on old wounds or the approval of others, a deeper kind of silence enters. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of arrival. There's no longer a need to be someone or to be seen a certain way. And in that space, something ancient stirs beneath the noise, a stillness that doesn't come and go, a presence that remains untouched by the past, unbothered by the future. And this is where the path leads next, not to another version of the self, not to a polished identity, but to a refuge, not a physical place, but something far more sacred, the place inside that nothing can reach unless you allow it. The inner refuge. In Buddhism, refuge is not about escape. It is not about leaving behind the world, pretending things don't hurt, or shielding yourself from life. It is the opposite. Taking refuge in the Dharma means turning inward, not to avoid the storm, but to find the place in you that can remain unmoved by it, not frozen, not numb, but clear, grounded, steady, because loss will come, betrayal will come, confusion will visit again and again, but none of it has the power to exile you from your own heart, unless you give it permission. This refuge is not built overnight. It's discovered slowly, through practice, through stillness, through the moments when everything outside you falls apart, and you have no choice but to go within. The outer world can take many things: reputation, relationships, health, even safety, but it cannot take your capacity to meet this moment. That capacity is yours. And when you remember that, you stop feeling like life is happening to you. You begin to sense that something inside you can hold all of it. The Dharma isn't a theory. It's not a set of beliefs or rules. It's a mirror that reflects your own freedom back to you. It shows you that suffering is not punishment. It is a signal, a call to return. Every moment of pain becomes an invitation to step into the refuge, not to collapse, but to realign, not to escape life, but to meet it from a different center, a center that doesn't move. Many people search for safety in others, in relationships, roles, achievements, but safety built on unstable ground will always create fear. If your peace depends on how others treat you or how well things go, it will never be steady. The refuge is what remains when all outer scaffolding falls. It is the stillness under heartbreak, the awareness beneath failure, the breath that continues even when everything else breaks apart. There are times when the heart is shattered by grief or rejection, and the mind starts to spin, looking for someone to blame, something to fix, somewhere to run. But the refuge is not found by running. It is found by sitting, by breathing, by letting the fire burn without trying to put it out. When you stop trying to control the storm, you realize the storm is not who you are. You are the awareness watching it pass. In Buddhist practice, the three refugees are Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. But these are not external icons. The Buddha is the awakened nature within you. The Dharma is the truth that is always unfolding inside and around you. The Sangha is not just a group of people. It is the field of presence that arises when you connect to life with sincerity. Taking refuge means saying, I no longer put my faith in chaos. I trust this path. I trust what is deeper than thought. This trust is not blind. It grows each time you survive what you thought you couldn't. Each time you lose something and still find breath. Each time you are betrayed and still choose not to close your heart completely. These moments are sacred, not because they feel good, but because they prove that you are not as fragile as your mind believed. The refuge becomes stronger every time you meet pain without turning it into an identity. The beauty of the inner refuge is that no one can give it to you, and no one can take it away. It doesn't depend on language, on culture, on belief. It's there in the silence of your breath, in the stillness of your spine, in the space behind your eyes when you close them and let yourself simply be. It's not something you create, it's something you uncover. You might doubt it at first, especially if life has taught you that safety is always conditional. You may search for proof that it exists, but the proof is always the same. When you stop trying to be somewhere else and you breathe deeply into the moment you're in, you feel it. Not always dramatically. Sometimes it's subtle, a softening in the belly, a lessening of mental noise, a flicker of peace. That's it. That's the door. When pain arises, the reflex is to resist. But the Dharma teaches a different response, to bow, not in defeat, but in reverence, to say, this too is part of the path. And when you do that, when you bow instead of break, you find yourself inside the refuge. You're no longer fighting life. You're flowing with it. You stop asking, why is this happening to me? And you start asking, what can I meet here, gently? The refuge is not passive. It's not waiting for life to get better. It is active stillness. It is choosing again and again to meet this moment with presence instead of panic, to trust the breath more than the story, to stay close to what's real instead of what's loud. And over time, this choice becomes natural. You start reaching for awareness the way you once reached for control. In the refuge, thoughts don't stop. Emotions don't disappear, but their power to define you weakens. You begin to see that you are not your fear, not your anger, not your sadness. You are the space they move through. You are the one who sees without judgment, and that seeing is the medicine, not because it changes what you feel, but because it holds what you feel without collapse. There may still be chaos outside, there may still be heartbreak, but in the refuge, you are not destroyed by it. You are moved, but not shattered. You cry, but you are not undone. You feel, but you are not lost. Because something in you is anchored, not in control, not in denial, but in truth. And truth is the only place peace can live. Taking refuge is not a one-time act. It's a practice, a remembering. Every time you come back to the breath, you're returning. Every time you pause before reacting, you're deepening it. Every time you let go of needing answers and choose to be present instead, you are stepping back inside. It becomes less of a sanctuary you run to and more of a home you never left. And perhaps the most beautiful part is this. Once you find the refuge in yourself, you begin to become a refuge for others. Not by giving advice, not by solving their problems, but by your presence. People feel safe around someone who doesn't need to fix them, who can sit in silence and offer space without fear. That's the gift of walking this path. Your healing becomes the doorway through which others feel seen. The world is loud. It will always try to pull you out of yourself. It will tempt you with roles, arguments, identities, distractions. But the Dharma offers a different kind of power, not the power to dominate, but the power to remain centered in the middle of it all. When you stop needing outer stability because you've found something unshakable inside, you become free. There is no badge for this refuge, no title, no applause, but you'll know it when you feel it. When a part of you starts smiling in the middle of sorrow, when you take a breath in the middle of tension and everything softens just a little, When you realize you don't need to win or escape, you just need to return. And you do, again and again. No matter what has been lost, no matter who left, no matter what part of your life didn't turn out the way you hoped, this refuge is still here, quiet, steady, waiting. And the moment you remember it, you are already inside. You don't need permission. You don't need to earn it. Just breathe. Just sit. Just stay. And from this sacred center, the journey continues, not toward escape, but deeper into life, with a heart that is open, a mind that is clear, and a presence that knows, no matter what comes next, you are already home. After discovering the inner refuge, the space within that remains untouched, no matter what happens around you, something begins to shift in how pain is held. It's no longer treated as something to run from or erase. It becomes something to listen to sit beside, to hold gently without resistance. But still, there may be moments when the past rises again, those cracks, those broken pieces, those old memories that never fully faded. And this is where the next teaching quietly unfolds. What if the cracks are not flaws, but sacred? What if the broken parts aren't mistakes, but the places where the gold goes? In Zen, there's a practice known as kintsugi, the art of repairing broken pottery with gold. Instead of hiding the break, it is highlighted. Instead of disguising the damage, it is celebrated. The crack becomes part of the story. More than that, it becomes the most beautiful part. The object is not thrown away. It is made whole again. Not by pretending it was never broken, but by honoring the break itself. This is not just art. It is wisdom. It is a way of seeing. Healing, in this way, is not about restoration to the past. It is about transformation through presence. Wholeness isn't about going back to the version of yourself before the pain. It's about becoming someone who has walked through it and still stands, but now with more depth, more compassion, and more light. The cracks are not the end of the story. They are the beginning of something richer. Kintsugi awareness is the choice to see your scars as sacred joins, not defects. Many people carry shame around their past. They try to cover it with success, with kindness, with perfection. They build lives around pretending the cracks don't exist. But this effort is exhausting, because deep down they know the pain hasn't been erased, just hidden. Buddhism teaches that hiding is not healing. Denial creates distance. But presence, real presence, begins the golden repair. When you stop being afraid of the parts of yourself that hurt, you begin to include them. You stop building a wall between the past and the present and begin to melt it with understanding. Kintsugi awareness asks you to do something different than what the world teaches. Instead of fixing yourself in secret, it invites you to show up exactly as you are and say, "This is what I've survived. This is where I cracked. This is how I've been mended." It's not about dramatizing your pain. It's about telling the truth with dignity. The truth that every wound you carry has shaped you. And when those wounds are met with care, they don't harden you. They open you. They become doorways. There's a quiet power in being visible with your history. Not in a way that seeks pity or attention, but in a way that honors the path. You don't have to reveal everything to everyone, but you can stop hiding from yourself. You can look at what happened, not with fear, but with gentleness. You can ask, "Where did I break?" And then, "How did I rise again?" That's where the gold goes, not on the surface, but deep in the cracks, the joins, the places where everything once fell apart and still, somehow, came back together. The practice of mindfulness becomes a way of tracing these golden lines. Each time you sit with your breath, you're not escaping your pain, you're illuminating it, not in a harsh spotlight, but in a warm glow. You're saying to yourself, I don't need to be unbroken to be whole. That sentence alone can change the way you carry your life. It means that healing is not becoming someone else, it's becoming more fully yourself. Wholeness, in this view, is not a smooth surface. It is textured, it has depth, it has stories woven into every part. You don't need to remove the history. You just need to meet it with new eyes. Eyes that don't flinch. Eyes that understand that scars are not shameful. They are evidence of transformation. And when you truly see your own scars this way, you begin to see the scars of others differently too. You stop judging. You stop comparing. You begin to respect the quiet battles people carry. Compassion flows more easily from this kind of awareness. Because you've walked through your own pain with tenderness, you don't rush others through theirs. You stop demanding they get over it. You stop trying to fix. You simply sit with them, as you've learned to sit with yourself. This is the beauty of kintsugi awareness. It changes not just how you heal, but how you love. You no longer need people to be perfect. You simply need them to be real. In Zen, it is said that nothing is ever truly lost, only transformed. Even suffering can become part of wisdom. Even heartbreak can lead to awakening, but only if it is met fully, not with resistance, but with reverence. The cracks are not problems. They are maps. They lead you back to the places that need the most care. When you practice loving-kindness meditation, you might begin with yourself. You say, "May I be well." And it can feel strange, because part of you believes you must earn that blessing, that you must fix yourself first. But when you practice from the perspective of kintsugi, you begin to include the broken parts in the blessing. You say, "May all of me be well, even the parts I've tried to hide, especially those." And something begins to shift. The heart doesn't need to be convinced anymore, it just softens. The metaphor of gold is important here, not because gold is expensive, but because it shines. The parts of you that cracked, the times you broke, those are the places where light can enter. They are more open than the rest. And if you stay close to them, with presence and breath and compassion, they start to glow. Not with perfection, but with truth. When people hear the word healing, they often think of getting back to who they used to be. But the old self is not the goal. The goal is integration, to gather all the pieces, including the ones you once rejected, and hold them together in a new way, stronger, softer, wiser. The new shape of you doesn't have to look like the old one. It's allowed to be different. It's allowed to be uneven and still be whole. The mind might resist this. It might say, "But if I accept my scars, won't I stop growing?" No. Acceptance is not the end of growth. It is the beginning of honest growth. When you no longer waste energy on hiding or pretending, you have more space for real movement. Growth that includes all of you, not just the parts that look good in public. Kintsugi awareness also changes how you relate to time. You no longer rush to get over it. You begin to trust the rhythm of healing. Some cracks mend quickly, Others take years. That's okay. The gold will come in its own time. The only requirement is that you keep showing up, keep breathing, keep returning. You don't have to force the repair. You just have to keep honoring the pieces. And sometimes honoring means resting. Not every phase of healing is active. Some of it is stillness. Some of it is doing less, saying no, sitting quietly with your hands in your lap and letting your nervous system breathe. In those moments, you are still mending, still laying down gold, even if no one sees it. There is beauty in quiet resilience, in the parts of you that kept going without applause, in the strength that never made it into your biography. That too is gold, not flashy, not loud, but real. And when you start to see your life through this lens, you begin to walk differently. You carry yourself with the dignity of someone who knows their scars are sacred. The world will still try to sell you perfection. It will still reward appearances, but your practice becomes deeper than that. You learn to see beneath the surface. You learn to bow to what is raw, and in that bowing, you become unshakable, not because you're invincible, but because you are no longer afraid of falling apart. Every piece of your story belongs, not as proof of failure, but as proof of return. You are not the same person who broke. You are the one who held the pieces, who softened, who kept breathing through the ache, who chose presence over performance. And that choice, again and again, is what lays the gold. So tonight, as you feel the weight of your body supported by the bed, as the breath rises and falls in its quiet rhythm, let yourself feel the joins, not the pain, but the proof. You are still here. You are still whole, not because nothing broke, but because you returned, and you're still returning. Each breath, another thread in the golden seam. And from this place of honoring, of silent dignity, of beautiful imperfection, the path opens again, one step further, one layer deeper, one breath closer to wholeness that includes everything and hides nothing. After honoring the beauty in every crack, after learning that even your scars can shine without needing to be hidden, something subtle begins to settle. Not as a conclusion, but as a soft pause. All the fixing, all the processing, all the inner work that seemed necessary begins to feel quieter. Not because the healing is over, but because it no longer needs to be pushed. There's a shift from doing to being, a shift from mending to resting in what already is. And this is the next door on the path. What if the final step toward wholeness isn't another effort, but the complete release of effort itself? In Buddhist thought, and deeply echoed in Taoist teachings, there's a concept called Wu Wei, non-doing, not laziness, not apathy, not checking out. It's the art of returning to what is natural, spontaneous, and unforced. It is the stillness beneath striving, the clarity beneath control. It is not about giving up, it's about giving in to the deeper intelligence already moving through you when the mind stops trying to steer everything. Most people spend their lives in constant effort. Effort to be better, effort to heal, effort to prove their worth. They wake up with to-do lists in their heads, not just for the outside world, but for their own hearts. They think, if I just fix this part of me, if I just master that habit, if I just read one more book, then I'll feel whole. But Buddhism invites a radical question. What if wholeness doesn't come from doing more, but from doing nothing at all? Doing nothing, in this context, doesn't mean abandoning responsibility. It means releasing the subtle tension of always needing to become. It means resting in the awareness that you are already what you're trying to reach, that the peace you're chasing is underneath the chase, that the silence you long for is buried beneath the voice that keeps talking. When you let go of fixing, what you find is not failure, it's return. There is something profoundly healing about letting go of the need to improve yourself, because underneath that need is often a belief that you're not enough yet, that who you are right now is somehow unacceptable. And that belief keeps the inner wheel spinning. But when you pause, not just physically, but mentally, and stop reaching for the next solution, you begin to taste a stillness that doesn't ask you to be anyone else. This stillness is not sterile, it's alive, it's full of space. It allows you to be here, now, without condition. And that is the essence of Wu Wei, acting in harmony with the present moment, without forcing, without manipulating, without resisting. In this way, doing nothing is not passive, it's deeply receptive. You become more available to life, not less. You stop fighting against it, and you begin to feel it moving through you, guiding you in a rhythm far wiser than mental control. In meditation, this is where the real shift begins. At first, many sit with effort, trying to concentrate, trying to calm down, trying to become something spiritual. But over time, the trying wears itself out. The breath is simply watched. The thoughts are simply allowed. The moment is simply met. And that's when the deep drop happens, not into blankness, but into presence, into awareness that does not need to grip, that watches everything arise and pass without getting tangled. This is not about giving up goals or ambition. It's about releasing the part of you that thinks you must grind your way into peace. It's about unlearning the belief that suffering must be earned before you're allowed to rest. Non-doing is a return to the original ground, the place where the breath flows on its own, where healing happens in the silence between thoughts, where nothing is missing because nothing is being chased. Most people are uncomfortable with stillness because it confronts them with themselves. The quiet reveals what effort was covering: restlessness, guilt, unresolved grief. But the miracle is this: when those things are met with no agenda, just awareness, they begin to unravel on their own. You don't have to process them into pieces. You don't have to name or fix them. You just have to stay. And in that staying, you return. Nature lives by this principle. The trees don't strive to grow, they grow. The sun doesn't force its light, it shines. The river doesn't think its way downstream, it flows. This is not passivity. This is trust. This is alignment with what already knows how to move through you if you stop blocking it with mental noise. Even in relationships, this way of being changes everything. When you stop managing people's perceptions, when you stop trying to control outcomes, when you sit in presence without needing to persuade or defend, you become magnetic. Not because you've performed something impressive, but because you are still. And that stillness makes others feel safe. It allows the space for something real to enter. Non-doing is also how intuition speaks, not through effort, but through silence, not through planning, but through presence. The next step, the right word, the needed pause, it rises when there's space for it. You don't need to figure everything out. You just need to be quiet enough to hear what already knows. This kind of rest is not exhaustion. It is restoration. You rest not because you're too tired to try, but because you finally realize there's nothing left to push. That the pushing was what kept you from arriving. And when you drop the push, your shoulders drop, your breath deepens, your thoughts slow, and in that space, life feels close again. The practice is simple. You sit, you breathe, and you let everything be as it is. Not because it's perfect, but because it is. You don't run from the discomfort. You don't cling to the comfort. You don't chase enlightenment. You sit in the middle of everything and allow. And this allowing becomes the doorway to wholeness, not because it gives you something new, but because it reveals what was always here beneath the striving. This is what the ancient masters meant when they spoke of the way. Not a path to walk, but a presence to return to. You don't have to become worthy of it. You just have to stop running from it. The way isn't far. It's as close as the next breath you're willing to feel fully, without changing anything. And in that breath, doing stops. Being begins. From this space, even action changes. You still move, still speak, still choose, but the movement is different. It flows from alignment, not anxiety. It arises naturally, without friction. It feels like being carried, not pushed. And even when life gets messy again, as it will, the stillness remains underneath. Because now you know how to return, not by effort, but by stopping effort. In the modern world, where value is often measured by productivity and performance, this teaching is revolutionary. It says you don't have to earn your place. You don't have to prove your worth. You don't have to constantly achieve to be whole. You are already enough, already here, already awake beneath the mind's noise. You just have to stop long enough to remember. And yes, the mind will resist. It will say, "You're wasting time." It will panic without a task. But let it. Watch it like you'd watch a child fussing before sleep. Let it exhaust itself. And in the silence that follows, feel what's been waiting underneath. The vast, quiet, living presence that asks for nothing but your willingness to stay. The truth is, the deepest healing often happens when you stop trying to heal, when you stop analyzing your wounds, when you stop turning your pain into a project, when you stop needing to be different from how you are. That is when the nervous system relaxes. That is when the heart opens. That is when the mind returns to its original clarity. Doing nothing doesn't mean withdrawing from life. It means meeting life without resistance, without agenda, without pushing. And from that meeting, real action arises. Not rushed, not forced, but rooted. The kind of action that feels natural, like breathing. The kind that doesn't deplete you because it's not coming from the mind's panic, but from the heart's knowing. So, tonight, if you feel tired, not just physically, but spiritually, let this be the permission you didn't know you needed. You can stop now. You can rest. You can let go of fixing, of striving, of trying to become. You are not late. You are not broken. You are here, and that's enough. Let the breath breathe itself. Let the thoughts rise and pass. Let the silence wrap around you like a blanket. You don't need to reach for peace. Just stop reaching. And there it is. Whole, quiet, already yours. And from that deep stillness, the journey continues, not forward, not backward, but deeper into presence. After resting in the stillness that asked for nothing, after releasing the endless effort to fix or strive or perform, something soft begins to stir within. A quiet awareness, a forgotten presence. Not of a problem, not of a concept, but of someone, small, unguarded, and long neglected. Not a memory, but a feeling. The one who was left behind during all the years of surviving. The one who wasn't comforted when they cried. The one who didn't understand why they were blamed, ignored, or told to grow up too soon. The one who quietly learned to disappear just to keep going. This part of you is not gone. It is still here, and it has waited silently for the day you would notice it again. That day is now. In Buddhism, healing is not about erasing the past. It is about bringing presence to what was never met with love. The practice of metta, or loving kindness, is not only for others. It is for the child inside, the one who internalized fear, shame, confusion, or loneliness, and had nowhere to place it. This is where befriending the inner orphan begins, not as a mental exercise, but as an act of radical compassion. It is not about remembering childhood details. It is about meeting the emotional imprint that still lives in your breath, in your nervous system, in your most reactive moments. The inner orphan is not a mistake. It is a younger version of you, frozen in time, still waiting for safety, for warmth, for someone to say, "I'm here now, you're not alone anymore." Many spiritual paths focus on transcending the self. But before transcendence, there must be reunion. You cannot abandon a part of yourself and expect to feel whole. You cannot meditate your way out of abandonment without first sitting beside it. Loving kindness toward the inner orphan is not indulgent. It is necessary. It is a reweaving of the psyche. It is reclaiming the energy that got trapped in moments of fear. When you were scolded for crying, when you were punished for being honest, when you were left out, misunderstood, or simply unseen, that pain didn't vanish. It was buried. And it shows up now, not in words, but in your reactions. In the tightness when you're misunderstood, in the panic when you're left out, in the coldness that rises when you're scared and don't know how to ask for comfort. This isn't a flaw in you, it is a signal. A quiet whisper from the orphaned self saying, "Please don't leave me behind again." And now, with presence, you can respond differently. You don't have to run. You don't have to silence it. You can sit with it, breathe with it, offer it what it was always asking for, not answers, but gentleness. Start with the breath. Let it be slow. Let it be deep. Picture the younger self, not as a photograph, but as a feeling. The posture of loneliness, the weight of confusion, the ache of wanting to be held and not knowing how to ask. Don't judge it, just notice it, and begin to speak to it, not with explanations, but with warmth. You say, "I see you. I've come back for you. You didn't deserve the silence. You didn't deserve the blame. You were just trying to survive." This inner dialogue is not make-believe. It is repair. It is presence where there was once only absence. And the brain, the nervous system, the body, they respond. The orphan doesn't need you to fix the past. It needs to know it's not alone in the present, that it is no longer being abandoned by the very self it trusted to come back. Sometimes this practice brings emotion. Tears may come, trembling may arise, old memories may flash through like a storm. Let them. You don't need to understand everything. You just need to stay. Don't analyze the story. Just breathe and keep saying to that inner presence, I am here. I'm not leaving. As the inner orphan begins to feel safer, something profound starts to change. Reactions soften, triggers lessen. You stop needing to protect yourself so aggressively in relationships. You stop expecting others to parent the parts of you you've never met. You begin to notice that what you craved from others, approval, soothing, comfort, you can now begin offering to yourself. This is not self-sufficiency in the cold sense. It is reparenting. It is becoming the adult you always needed. This does not mean rejecting your actual parents. It means recognizing their limitations and no longer waiting for them to do what they couldn't. You give yourself permission to stop waiting. And in that moment, the orphan no longer clings to ghosts. It begins to rest in the warmth of your own attention. Loving kindness isn't forced. It grows with sincerity. Each time you feel hurt or reactive, ask yourself gently, is this the orphan speaking? If the answer is yes, you soften. You don't suppress the emotion. You don't act out from it. You turn inward and offer presence. This internal redirection changes the entire emotional landscape of your life. You move from abandonment to connection, not through others, but through the self that finally showed up. This practice also reveals your true strength. Not the strength of armor or indifference, but the strength to stay with what was once too painful to face. You realize that you are not fragile. You are capable of holding the full spectrum of your experience, including the oldest, tenderest parts. Over time, the inner orphan begins to speak less in panic and more in peace. It no longer screams, it whispers, and sometimes it simply rests. Not because it has been erased, but because it has been held. The reunion is complete not when the pain is gone, but when it no longer has to fight for attention, when it trusts that it will be seen without having to create chaos. This changes your presence in the world. You walk differently. You respond more gently. You listen more fully. Because you are no longer moving through life with an unspoken ache. You are walking beside someone you've made peace with, someone who used to hide in the dark and now walks in the light of your awareness. This kind of reparenting is not about technique. It is about presence. No script, no steps, just a willingness to return again and again to the breath, to the feeling, to the part of you that once felt forgotten. And every time you do, the orphan becomes less orphaned. It becomes part of the whole. And this integration is the very definition of healing. Not that nothing ever hurt, but that nothing is left behind. You are not divided. You are not split into the adult who functions and the child who suffers in silence. You are one, breathing, feeling, becoming. Let the world rush outside. Let the noise rise and fall. Inside, something quieter is happening. A homecoming, a warmth where there used to be cold, a presence where there used to be absence, and all of it built not by force, but by love. From this sacred reunion, the path continues, not into striving, not into escaping, but into deeper wholeness. Wholeness that now includes the part of you that waited the longest to be seen. After sitting with the inner orphan, after learning to hold the forgotten parts with quiet compassion and staying power, a new kind of peace starts to settle in. It's not loud or dramatic. It's not the kind of peace that makes headlines or sparks applause. It's the peace of knowing that you no longer abandon yourself, that the most vulnerable parts of your being have a place now, not because they were fixed, but because they were finally included. But even in that wholeness, another question begins to stir gently beneath the surface. A question that comes from the tension between acceptance and growth. If nothing is wrong with you, why do you still want to evolve? If you're healing, why do you still feel the need to become more? And if you're enough as you are, is it wrong to still want to change? This is where the middle way begins to unfold, not as a compromise, but as a deep truth. The path that lies between constant self-improvement and passive self-acceptance is not a contradiction. It is a rhythm, a flow, a way of walking in the world where growth happens not through pressure, and presence doesn't mean stagnation. Wholeness, in this view, is not a static state. It is a balance that shifts, breathes, and adjusts moment to moment. Buddhism has always pointed toward the middle way, not too tight, not too loose, not indulgence, not self-denial. And when it comes to our inner world, this teaching becomes even more necessary, because the culture often screams both messages at once. Be better, but love yourself, achieve more. But don't try too hard. This contradiction leads many into confusion or guilt. Either they're exhausted from striving, or stuck in a kind of resignation disguised as peace. The middle way says there's another possibility: growth without self-rejection and acceptance without collapse. When you walk this path, you begin to sense when you're pushing too hard. You notice the strain, the tightness, the quiet message underneath your efforts that says, you're not enough until you change. And instead of obeying that voice, you pause, you breathe, you ask, can I grow from love instead? Growth doesn't stop, but the tone shifts. The pressure softens. You start evolving because it feels natural, not because you're trying to prove something. On the other side, when you sense yourself starting to settle into avoidance, telling yourself, this is just how I am, as a way of escaping the discomfort of change, you catch that too. You notice when presence becomes passive, when acceptance becomes avoidance. And again, you pause. You listen deeper. You ask, am I honoring myself right now or hiding from life? And the answer is usually clear when you're honest. This is not judgment, it's care. The middle way is about listening with precision, not performing perfection. This path isn't measured in dramatic moments. It's found in the ordinary, in how you speak to yourself when you make a mistake, in whether you meditate because you're punishing yourself or because you love your mind, in whether you push yourself to act because of shame or because of an inner calling that comes from stillness. Motivation doesn't disappear on this path. It just changes source. It begins to come from alignment instead of insecurity. The mind will try to trick you. It will say, if you accept yourself, you'll stop growing. But the truth is the opposite. Real growth only becomes sustainable when it is rooted in acceptance. Otherwise, it becomes a treadmill. You run faster, but never arrive. You achieve more, but never feel full. Self-acceptance gives growth roots. It allows your expansion to be honest, not performative. And when you grow from that place, the changes are deeper. They last. Likewise, the mind will whisper, if you grow, it means you're not really accepting yourself. But that too is untrue. You can hold space for who you are now while still leaning toward who you're becoming. That tension is not a problem. It's creative energy. It's the edge where transformation happens, not because you reject the present, but because you see the potential already inside it. This balance requires daily attention, not to control it, but to stay in relationship with it. Sometimes you'll lean more into rest, sometimes into effort. But the middle is not a fixed point. It's a moving center. You check in, you breathe, you ask, what am I doing out of fear? What am I doing out of love? And you shift, gently, repeatedly, with no drama. This also transforms how you relate to your spiritual path. Meditation becomes less of a performance and more of a friendship. Mindfulness stops being something to conquer and becomes a way of returning. Even your goals, career, health, relationships stop being loaded with desperation. They become expressions of your unfolding, not trophies for your value. You begin to move with intention, but without force. That's the middle way in action. There's also a deep kindness that grows here. You stop attacking your past selves. You stop resenting who you used to be. Because now you see that every version of you was walking this same balance, doing their best to grow while trying not to collapse. You start to bow to those old selves, not because they were perfect, but because they kept walking. And when you interact with others, this understanding changes everything. You become less reactive, less judgmental. You see that everyone is managing this same tension, wanting to evolve, yet afraid of losing themselves, wanting to be accepted, yet terrified of staying stuck. So you give people space, you offer gentleness, you encourage without pushing, you love without rescuing. That's what this balance looks like in relationship. Self-discipline doesn't disappear on this path. It becomes softer, more refined. You begin to act from clarity, not compulsion. You keep promises to yourself, not because you'll feel guilty if you don't, but because it feels good to be in integrity. You begin to trust your inner timing. You let rest be part of progress. You let silence be part of learning. You start to understand that the fastest path is the one that doesn't burn you out. This isn't easy. The world teaches extremes: push hard or let go, fix everything or give up. But Buddhism whispers something different. Stay in the center, even when the edges are loud. It doesn't mean you don't fall out of balance. It means you return sooner. You recover quicker. You notice more. In time, this becomes second nature. The tension doesn't disappear, but it becomes familiar. You stop fighting it. You begin to work with it. Some days you'll lean more into acceptance, some days into growth. But neither is the enemy. Both are part of the dance. You are allowed to hold both truths. I am enough, and I can grow. They do not cancel each other. They support each other. One gives you ground, the other gives you wings. So tonight, as you lie still, let this be your reminder. Wholeness is not found in finally arriving. It's found in learning how to walk the middle, again and again, with breath, with compassion, with trust that you don't have to choose between loving yourself and becoming more. You can do both. You already are. And from this center, the next step of your path opens, not with pressure, not with resistance, but with quiet clarity and a steady heart. After learning to walk the middle way between growth and acceptance, after releasing the pressure to become someone else while still honoring the call to expand, something deeper begins to stir beneath the surface. A feeling few speak about, yet everyone knows: desire. Not the craving that grasps or the hunger that consumes, but the deep longing that sits quietly in the heart. The longing for beauty, for connection, for truth, for something more. Not more in the greedy sense, but more in the sacred sense. A fullness that doesn't leave you hollow, a freedom that doesn't numb you. And for many on the path, this is where confusion begins, because spiritual teachings often warn against desire, and yet desire still moves. This is where Tantric Buddhism offers something unexpected. It doesn't ask you to kill desire. It doesn't tell you that wanting is wrong. Instead, it teaches how to listen, how to meet desire not with resistance, but with wisdom. It reframes desire not as poison, but as power, not as a mistake, but as a messenger. The problem isn't that you want. The problem is how you hold what you want. When desire is clung to with desperation, it becomes suffering. But when desire is held with spacious awareness, it becomes sacred fuel. It becomes the very fire that lights the path, not because it is indulged and not because it is denied, but because it is understood. This understanding begins by noticing how desire moves through you, not in theory, but in sensation. Where does it land in the body? What does it whisper? Does it contract or expand? Does it come from fear or from vitality? The more clearly you see its shape, the less it controls you, and the less you judge it, the more it softens. You begin to see that not all desire is the same. Some desires arise from the ego's fear of not being enough. Others come from the soul's longing to return to something more real, and this discernment changes everything. Tantric practice teaches that energy is not the enemy. What matters is how it is held. Just like a strong river can nourish or destroy depending on its banks, desire can lead to awakening or suffering depending on the awareness surrounding it. When you grip it, it burns you. When you suppress it, it festers. But when you welcome it, breathe into it, and hold it in the heart of presence, it becomes transformation. This does not mean acting on every impulse. It means becoming intimate with the impulse without obeying it blindly. You sit with the want, you feel it fully, and you ask, what is this truly pointing to? What is underneath it? Sometimes it's not the object you crave, but the feeling you believe it will bring. Safety, recognition, aliveness. And when you name that, when you go to the root, you no longer chase shadows. You start working directly with what is real. The mind loves to split things. Wanting is bad. Letting go is good. But this binary breaks down on the tantric path. Here, desire and renunciation are not opposites. They are dance partners. Letting go is not the suppression of desire. It is the spacious holding of it. And desire is not the abandonment of peace. It is the movement of life toward itself. In this view, the goal is not to stop feeling, but to feel without being consumed. This is what it means to transmute desire into awareness. You don't escape the energy, you allow it to rise, and then you meet it with presence so spacious that it cannot collapse into craving. It expands instead. It lifts. It opens the heart instead of closing it. It becomes a prayer instead of a demand. In daily life, this changes everything. You no longer fear your longings. You stop apologizing for wanting depth, connection, beauty, truth. But you also stop using those longings to chase things that cannot truly satisfy. You hold them like fire, carefully, reverently. You let the warmth reach you, but you don't burn. You trust the desire, but not its every direction. You listen more than you react. This doesn't mean you give up your goals or your passions. It means you meet them differently. You act not out of lack, but out of fullness. You move toward what matters, but you don't grip the outcome. You release the belief that you must get everything you want to be okay. And this releases a kind of joy that isn't dependent on results. It's the joy of integrity, of alignment, of moving with the current of life instead of against it. Desire, in this view, is not noise, it's music. But you have to learn how to listen, how to feel the beat without being hypnotized by it, how to dance without losing balance. This requires practice, presence, honesty. You begin to notice when the wanting feels tight, when it pulls you out of the moment, when it tries to fix a hole that presence could have filled. And in that moment, you pause, you breathe, you ask, what if I stayed here instead? And something softens. You don't need to act. You don't need to push. You just need to be. With the wanting, without the chase, with the feeling, without the story. And what happens next is not suppression, it's alchemy. The desire transforms. It becomes warmth in the chest, lightness in the spine, space in the mind, and the object you once thought would complete you no longer holds power over you, not because you forced it away, but because you saw through it, because you stayed, because you let it teach you instead of rule you. In relationships, this changes the entire dynamic. You stop needing others to complete a picture. You stop demanding that they soothe every hunger. You begin to share love, not from emptiness, but from presence. You no longer reach for them to escape yourself. You reach with awareness, with care, with freedom to stay or to let go. Desire remains, but now it's woven with clarity, with stillness. Tantric Buddhism doesn't erase longing, it refines it. It teaches that the deepest desire is not for a thing or a person, it's for union, for truth, for dissolving into something larger than the self. And when that longing is met with deep presence, it opens. It becomes devotion, not to an external God, but to life itself, to the sacredness of this moment, to the flame that wants nothing but to burn clearly. This is not abstract. It is felt in the breath, in the body, in the pause before you reach, in the space between thoughts, in the knowing that you are allowed to want, but you are not required to obey. You can hold the fire. You can rest with it. You can let it warm you without letting it burn down your house. And sometimes that means grieving the old way, grieving the part of you that chased endlessly, that begged the world to fill a space it didn't know how to enter, that grasped because it didn't yet know how to feel. You bless that version of yourself. You say, "Thank you," and you let it go. Not with coldness, but with love. Because now you are no longer running from desire, and you are no longer enslaved to it. You are walking with it, listening, holding, breathing. And in that space, the energy once called craving becomes something sacred, something quiet, something that no longer takes from you, but gives you back to yourself. This is not a final state. It's a path, a rhythm. Some days you'll chase, some days you'll grasp. But now you know how to return. You catch yourself faster, you soften more easily, and desire, once feared or worshipped, becomes what it was always meant to be. A wave you can ride, not drown in. So tonight, let every longing rise without judgment. Let every hunger speak. But instead of reaching for the thing, reach for presence, for the breath, for the awareness that can hold everything without needing to grab it. And let that awareness fill the space. Let it become more satisfying than the outcome ever could. And from that deep, still satisfaction, the journey continues, not toward more, not away from less, but into the center, where desire becomes light, where longing becomes clarity, and where you remember, once again, that nothing needs to be pushed away to find peace. It only needs to be held differently. After learning to sit with desire, not to obey or reject it, but to hold it with presence, a new kind of clarity starts to emerge. The mind becomes less tangled in wanting and more curious about what's really happening underneath it all. A quiet question starts to surface. If I'm not what I desire, and I'm not what I push away, then what exactly am I? Not in the sense of a label or a belief, but in a direct, lived experience. What is this self I keep trying to fix, defend, or define? And is it possible to meet that question not with conclusions, but with observation? In Buddhist practice, this is the turning point, where identity stops being something to declare and starts being something to witness. This is where the teaching of the five aggregates becomes a doorway, not as a theory to memorize, but as a tool to explore what we call the self without needing to break it or glue it together. The five aggregates, form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness, are not parts of a person. They are processes, streams of experience. Together, they create the illusion of a fixed self. But when observed clearly, they reveal something far more honest. There is no solid core. There is movement, pattern, flow, and wholeness is found not by clinging to one of these parts, but by seeing how they arise and pass like waves on a shore. This observation is not meant to destroy the self, it's meant to free it from illusion. You start to see the body as form, changing, aging, experiencing sensation. The form is not you. It is known by you. You see feelings arise, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. These feelings don't define you. They visit you. You observe perceptions, your ability to recognize shapes, names, symbols, and emotional tones. These perceptions build a world, but they are not fixed. They depend on context, mood, memory. Then come the mental formations, your thoughts, beliefs, reactions, intentions. These often seem to be the core of the self. But when you really look, you see how quickly they change. One moment, confidence. The next, doubt. One moment, fear. The next, calm. These patterns move, and yet we tend to say, "That's me." But they are not the self. They are what the self watches. And finally, consciousness, the awareness that knows all of this is happening. Consciousness does not cling. It sees. It allows. It witnesses the other aggregates as they shift. And here's the subtle truth. When you watch all five closely, what begins to fall apart is the illusion that there is a single, solid me at the center of it all. What's left is not a void. It's not cold. It's vast. It's peaceful. Because nothing needs to be defended anymore. No part needs to be rejected or turned into identity. Everything can be seen. Everything can belong. Observing the five aggregates is not an abstract practice. It's a direct encounter with your experience. When anger rises, you can notice the tightness in the chest, form, the heat, feeling, the judgmental thoughts, mental formations, the labeling of a person or event as the cause, perception, and the knowing of all of this, consciousness. In that moment, you are not lost in anger. You are aware within it, and that changes the entire experience. It breaks the trance. This is the foundation of integration. You stop fragmenting yourself into good moods and bad days, into authentic self and shadow. You start to see that all of it is made of the same moving parts. There's no part that needs to be kicked out, no feeling that disqualifies you from peace. When you observe the aggregates, you step into wholeness, not by making everything feel good, but by allowing everything to be seen clearly. In meditation, this observation becomes a daily practice. Sitting quietly, you scan your experience, a sensation in the body, form, a reaction to it, feeling, a mental label, perception, a thought that arises, mental formation, the awareness of all of it, consciousness. And the more you practice, the more fluid your sense of self becomes. You stop grasping. You stop building yourself out of thoughts. You begin to rest in the movement without trying to freeze it. This also transforms how you relate to the world. You stop assuming that people are only what they show. You know that everyone is made of aggregates too, shifting sensations, moods, memories, projections. When someone reacts with anger, you don't have to take it personally. You see their mental formations, their feelings, their perceptions. You don't reduce them to that moment. And that opens the door to compassion, to non-reactivity, to wisdom that sees beyond behavior into the process that produced it. This isn't about detachment in the cold sense. It's about liberation from confusion. The confusion that says, I am this thought, I am this mood, I am this opinion. When you see how each of these arises from conditions, you begin to relax. You stop forcing things to be permanent, and that gives you freedom to respond instead of react, to let things come and go without building an identity around every shift. Even physical pain becomes easier to hold with this view. Instead of being your pain, it becomes a pattern, a form, a sensation, a series of reactions. You don't deny the pain. You become curious about it. You breathe with it. You soften around it. And sometimes it loosens its grip, not because it disappears, but because your identification with it weakens. This observation also dismantles shame. Shame thrives when we believe our feelings and thoughts are who we are. But when you see them as aggregates, you realize this feeling is passing, this thought is conditioned, this reaction is not a flaw, it's a formation. And that insight breaks the chain. Shame becomes just another moment, not a prison. You don't have to do this all at once. Start with one moment, one breath, one emotion. Watch it arise. Notice what part of the aggregate it belongs to. Breathe. And instead of becoming it, witness it. Even a few seconds of this changes your nervous system. You begin to trust awareness more than identity, and that trust grows. There's something beautiful about this path. It doesn't promise that you'll always feel good. It promises that you'll stop being fooled, that you'll see life as it is, not to escape it, but to meet it with open eyes. When you stop needing to be a certain way, and you start seeing how things move through you, peace comes, not from perfection, from understanding. You'll still have preferences, still make choices, but you'll do so with less attachment, less ego, less confusion. You'll know that everything, pleasure, discomfort, joy, sorrow, is a dance of aggregates. And you'll move through that dance with more grace, because you're no longer trying to be the dancer. You're resting as the space the dance moves through. And in that space, wholeness isn't something you reach. It's something you remember. Not as a conclusion, but as a lived truth. That nothing in you is separate. Nothing needs to be erased. Everything can be held in awareness. Everything can be seen, and seeing it fully is the beginning of being free. So let tonight be simple. Let the body rest. Let the thoughts float. Let the feelings rise and fall. And in the middle of it all, stay aware. Stay open. Let the aggregates move, and let yourself be the witness, spacious and kind, needing nothing to stay and nothing to go. From that place of seeing, the path continues, clearer, softer, whole. After seeing the self as a movement of aggregates, form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness, a kind of inner quiet begins to grow. Not a silence forced by withdrawal or effort, but a natural hush that comes when the need to cling, explain, or define starts to dissolve. The fragments are no longer at war. The parts are no longer being labeled as good or bad. Instead, they are simply seen. And in the space of being seen, they begin to soften and settle. But to stay in this wholeness, to deepen it, another doorway appears. A doorway that has no words and yet speaks to everything within. That doorway is silence. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence that holds everything without pushing it away. This silence is not absence. It is connection. It is what happens when all parts of the self are given space to breathe, to listen, and to return home. Most people treat silence like a gap between events, something to fill, something to escape, a moment between what really matters. But in Buddhist practice, silence is not a pause from life. It is life itself, stripped of noise. It is the unspoken language that speaks directly to the body, to the breath, to the core of being without needing explanation. It is not isolation, it is integration. In silence, there is no longer a need to perform, react, or edit. What arises simply arises. What moves, moves, and through this, all parts of the self begin to find each other again. Silence is not just the absence of sound. It is the absence of friction, the stillness where no part of you is being judged or pushed. The breath deepens, the thoughts thin out, and what remains is not blankness, it is presence, full, alive, undivided. This kind of silence isn't passive, it is powerful. It is what allows the internal chatter to slow down long enough for deeper truths to surface. In this silence, old stories lose their urgency. The inner critic loses its volume, and what's left is something closer to peace, not because everything is solved, but because everything is allowed. When you enter deep silence with mindfulness, it doesn't feel like hiding. It feels like returning. You are not running from the world. You are returning to the center from which you can meet the world with steadiness. Periods of silence, especially when practiced regularly, act like gravity for the soul. Scattered thoughts begin to orbit more gently. Emotions that once crashed into each other begin to find space. And the deeper you go into this stillness, the more you begin to feel the subtle stitching of your inner world reconnecting. Not by force, not by effort, but by allowance. It's important to understand that silence does not always feel peaceful at first. For many, the initial experience is restlessness, boredom, even fear. Because the mind has been conditioned to associate stillness with emptiness, with discomfort. But if you stay long enough, if you breathe through the urge to escape, what begins to rise is not chaos, it's clarity. Silence is the mirror that shows what's underneath the noise, and it shows it gently, without distortion. This is why silent meditation retreats are not escapes from life. They are confrontations with reality. The reality that the mind has created layers of protection through sound, through speech, through distraction. But in silence, there is nowhere to hide. And in that nakedness, something real emerges. A tenderness, a simplicity, a recognition that the self you've been trying to find was never lost. It was just buried under too many words. Mindful silence creates space between impulse and action, between emotion and reaction. It gives your nervous system a chance to slow down, to repair, and over time, you begin to crave that space, not as an escape, but as nourishment. You start to see how much of your suffering came not from events themselves, but from the noise that followed them. The overthinking, the retelling, the layering of commentary that silence gently dissolves. This practice also deepens relationships. When you can hold silence in a conversation, when you can pause instead of filling the space, you become a better listener. You hear not just what someone says, but how they feel. You notice the tremble in their voice, the pauses between words. And people feel that. They feel your presence. Your stillness becomes a refuge for them too. And when you can hold silence within yourself, you stop being reactive. You don't need to defend every thought. You don't need to justify every feeling. You let things move through without clinging, without controlling. And what you start to notice is that even your inner parts, the scared ones, the loud ones, the confused ones, they begin to settle too, because they no longer feel pushed out. They are simply held. That is the healing power of silence. It doesn't fix you, it includes you. In silence, The mind begins to see its own patterns more clearly. The same thoughts that seemed convincing when shouted begin to look softer when whispered. The urgency to act gives way to curiosity, and this opens the door to insight, not as information, but as direct knowing. You begin to recognize your own rhythms. You start to feel when something is arising from habit or from truth. You learn to trust the inner compass that only becomes clear in quiet. Silence also reconnects you with the body, with breath, with posture, with the sensation of being alive. In a world that encourages endless thinking, silence pulls you back into sensing, into feeling the weight of your feet on the floor, the rhythm of your inhale and exhale, the texture of your aliveness in this exact moment. And that, too, is integration. You are no longer split into head and body, past and future, wanting and avoiding. You are here. This practice can be woven into daily life. It doesn't require a monastery or a retreat center. It can begin with 1 minute of silent sitting before your day begins, with a few breaths of quiet before responding to a message, with choosing to walk without headphones, drive without filling the space, eat without distractions. These small pockets of silence begin to build a new rhythm. They become anchor points in a world that often pulls you away from yourself. And as the silence grows, you stop fearing it. You begin to see it not as emptiness, but as fullness without noise. Not as absence, but as sacred presence. And slowly, the fear of being alone fades. Because you are not alone, you are simply with yourself. All of you. Held in one spacious awareness that does not divide. You stop needing to narrate your experience to feel it. You stop needing to explain your pain to validate it. You stop needing to share every insight to trust it. Because the silence itself becomes enough. Not as a rule, not as a discipline, but as a refuge, a reminder that beneath every word, every identity, every goal, there is this breath, this stillness, this presence that says nothing but means everything. And in that stillness, something deeper happens. Parts of you that never spoke begin to emerge. The silent grief, the unspoken awe, the questions that words can't touch. They come forward, not to be solved, but to be seen, and they are. Not because you talk to them, but because you listen. This is the silence that heals, the silence that integrates, the silence that brings all parts of the self, thinking, feeling, sensing, remembering, into one undivided presence. It does not ask you to be perfect. It does not require you to have answers. It simply asks that you stay, that you rest, that you let the noise fall away long enough to hear what was waiting underneath. So tonight, let silence be your teacher. Not forced, not sterile, but alive. Sit in it. Breathe in it. Let it hold you like the sky holds the clouds, gently, without judgment, without rushing. And in that holding, let yourself feel whole, not because everything is resolved, but because everything is welcome. And from this quiet center, the path continues, not with more words, not with louder effort, but with stillness as your guide. After resting in silence, the kind that doesn't just quiet the mouth, but softens every corner of the mind, something rare begins to return. A clarity that isn't built from logic, a wholeness that isn't pieced together by force. There's no more chasing, no more fixing, just breath, just space, just being. And within that being, a question arises, not spoken, but deeply felt. What if none of the labels you've collected are actually you? What if freedom isn't in adding more insight, but in letting go of everything you thought you knew? This is the threshold of returning to original mind, a mind that isn't built from memory or identity, a mind that doesn't seek to be right, but seeks to be real. Beginner's mind, the place where truth isn't held in ideas, it's discovered moment by moment. In Zen, they speak often of the beginner's mind, not as naivety, but as sacred openness. It is the mind before the story, the mind before the name, the one that doesn't carry conclusions into the next breath. It looks at life without filters, not because it lacks intelligence, but because it has stopped pretending it already knows what everything means. And in that innocence, not ignorance, but innocence, life begins to feel alive again. Accumulated identity is heavy. Over the years it builds like layers of paint, until the original texture of your being becomes hard to feel. You're not just seeing a flower, you're seeing what you were taught it meant. You're not just meeting a person, you're meeting your past assumptions about them. Even your own emotions aren't experienced freshly. They're judged, compared, labeled. Beginner's mind cuts through that weight, not with force, but with curiosity. Curiosity is the heartbeat of original mind. It doesn't cling to expertise. It doesn't wear your past like armor. It asks quietly, "What is this right now?" And it listens. It doesn't assume it knows the shape of the next moment. It doesn't reduce the world to concepts. And in that not knowing, it comes closer to truth than any certainty ever could. Most people fear not knowing. They fill the unknown with conclusions, with categories. But that very reflex, trying to label, trying to define, is what keeps them away from presence. Beginner's mind isn't about being confused. It's about being honest enough to admit that every moment is new, and therefore no past thought can fully explain it. It's about letting go of the idea that understanding something means controlling it. Returning to beginner's mind isn't regression. It's restoration. You're not going backward. You're waking up again to what you stopped seeing, to the sky without commentary, to the feeling of water without analysis, to your own breath, not as a technique, but as a miracle. Original mind doesn't need permission to be here. It simply waits for you to drop what you're holding. This dropping is not dramatic. It's quiet. You don't throw your beliefs away. You just stop gripping them. You don't erase your memories. You stop treating them as blueprints. You begin to trust something deeper than thought, something that doesn't need to narrate experience to feel it, something that listens, watches, receives. Meditation is one of the places where beginner's mind becomes especially clear. At first, you bring expectations, hopes, maybe even a goal. But over time, those attachments make the practice feel narrow. You start to realize that the richest meditations are the ones where you drop all techniques and simply sit with no aim but to be awake, to breathe, to meet the moment not with control but with welcome. This is not laziness, it's intimacy. You're not checking out, you're checking in. Without pretending you know what's supposed to happen, without rushing the experience into meaning. And in that letting go of expertise, a different kind of knowing emerges. One that isn't in the head. It's in the body, in the breath, in the way your heart responds to the world when it's not being told how to feel. Beginner's mind is also a powerful teacher in conflict. When you approach a disagreement with the belief that you already understand everything, your side, their side, the meaning, the outcome, you leave no room for anything new to unfold. But when you approach it with original mind, you listen not to confirm, but to learn. You drop your defenses, not because you're weak, but because you're willing to see. And in that willingness, relationships change. Not always easily, but deeply. Original mind changes how you live your day. The walk to your car becomes different. The way you eat your breakfast shifts. You're not going through routines, you're discovering them again. Because now, you're not doing life from memory. You're meeting it directly, not distracted by what it should be, just present with what it is. Even your relationship with pain changes. Instead of labeling it, fearing it, or bracing against it, you get curious. What is this sensation right now? Not what I think it means, not what I remember it felt like yesterday, but this exact moment. And in that asking, something opens. The pain doesn't always vanish, but the suffering lessens, because the mind stops fighting the unknown with old weapons. Children live this way naturally, not because they lack knowledge, but because they haven't yet covered over the world with too much story. They touch things to feel them, not to categorize. They ask questions not to prove a point, but to learn. And when we return to that openness, we're not becoming childish, we're reclaiming clarity. Beginner's mind doesn't mean starting from zero every time. It means returning to the present as if it were fresh. Because it is. Every breath is unrepeatable. Every moment is a one-time only offering. And to meet it with the weight of all your past conclusions is to miss its gift. This practice brings humility, not the kind that lowers you, but the kind that softens you. You stop needing to be the expert. You stop needing to be right. You begin to value presence more than performance. You start to listen more than you speak, and that listening becomes your wisdom. In teaching, beginner's mind allows you to connect. Because you're not delivering knowledge from a throne, you're exploring truth with the person in front of you. In art, beginner's mind brings spontaneity. Because you're not copying a past version of yourself, you're responding to the canvas as if it were alive. In love, it brings wonder, because you stop assuming you know your partner and you meet them anew every time. This way of being doesn't cancel out memory or insight. It just stops them from becoming cages. You're still allowed to remember, to learn, to build, but you hold your knowing lightly, like a leaf, not a sword. You stop proving yourself. You start being yourself without needing to explain it. So tonight, let the need to define things fall away. Let every label, success, failure, smart, broken, spiritual, lost, drift to the side. Not because they're wrong, but because they're too small to hold the fullness of this moment. Breathe as if you've never breathed before. Feel the air on your skin as if it's the first time. Let your own presence surprise you. And from that freshness, the path continues, not with certainty, but with wonder. Not with strategy, but with sincerity. Not with the burden of knowing, but with the freedom of beginning again, in every breath, forever whole. After returning to beginner's mind, after dropping the weight of old identities and meeting the world with curiosity instead of conclusions, something even more subtle begins to come into view. A quiet tug-of-war that has been happening beneath the surface, often unnoticed. The tension between who you think you are and who you think you're supposed to be. The comparison between your current self and your imagined, better version. It's not loud like fear or sharp like grief, but it drains energy, splits attention, and keeps the heart from resting. It whispers that you're not quite there yet, that if you tried a little harder, fixed a few more things, you'd finally arrive. But that destination never seems to come, and so begins the quiet, relentless inner conflict, one that can't be solved by achieving more, one that only dissolves when the illusion of separation is seen through completely. This is where the teaching of non-duality, Advaya, enters, not as philosophy, but as direct experience. Non-duality doesn't ask you to believe anything. It doesn't require spiritual jargon or cosmic metaphors. It simply points to what is already true beneath all effort. That the division between self and life, between now and later, between what I am and what I should be, is a mental construction, one that can be gently set down. And when it is, the war ends. At the heart of non-duality is one simple recognition. There is no separate self observing the world. There is only awareness, appearing as this moment, not awareness of something, just awareness, being everything, the thoughts, the sensations, the emotions, all arising within the same field. No boundary, no center, just movement held in presence. The illusion of separation begins early. The mind learns to divide. This is me, that is not. This is success, that is failure. This is right, that is wrong. And over time, this mental slicing creates suffering. It creates an internal judge, a voice that constantly measures your worth by comparing it to an ideal. You walk around not just living, but analyzing yourself in real time. Was that enough? Did I say the right thing? Am I who I'm supposed to be yet? The mind becomes both actor and critic, exhausting. But when non-duality is seen, not understood conceptually, but felt in the body, this split begins to dissolve. The voice of judgment quiets, not because you've won its approval, but because you've stopped believing it was ever separate from the rest of you. You see that even the inner critic is just another arising in awareness, no more real or final than a passing cloud. The path to this realization is not through effort, it's through inquiry and direct observation. When a thought arises, I should be more disciplined, you pause. You ask, who is this I that should be more? Not to find an answer, but to see the question collapse. There's no fixed self behind the thought. There's just thought, arising. And in that space of recognition, a strange peace enters. Because if there is no solid self to fix, then maybe there was never anything wrong. This doesn't lead to apathy. It leads to wholeness. You can still grow, still learn, still refine your actions, but it no longer comes from war. It comes from love, from clarity, from alignment, not inadequacy. You stop being driven by the whip of not good enough. You start moving with the breath of presence. In relationships, this changes everything. You stop projecting your inner split onto others. You stop trying to get them to confirm your worth. You listen more, react less. Because now there's space. Space to see that the other person isn't separate either. Their pain is your pain. Their joy is your joy. Not as a metaphor, but as a lived experience. Even in solitude, you feel connected, because you no longer feel like a separate entity floating in the universe. You are life itself, conscious of its own movement. You don't need validation to exist. You don't need to be seen a certain way to be real. The fear of not being enough starts to lose its grip, because there's no longer a standard outside of this moment to compare yourself to. Non-duality doesn't mean that all feelings disappear. Sadness still comes, anger still visits. But they're no longer personal. They're not your sadness or your anger. They are just energy moving through awareness, felt fully, held gently, released naturally. You stop clinging to stories. You stop arguing with what is. This doesn't mean you become passive. It means you act without inner conflict. You don't delay your peace until you become someone else. You live it now. And paradoxically, this allows real transformation to happen, because you're no longer resisting yourself. You're no longer split into a doer and a done to. You're whole. This also changes your relationship with time. The idea that peace is in the future starts to look absurd. You begin to notice how often the mind says, "When I achieve that, then I'll feel okay." And you pause. You ask, "Is that true?" You check in with the moment. You breathe. You realize peace was here the whole time, but you were too busy chasing it to notice. And when you do this again and again, the nervous system starts to unwind. The body no longer prepares for battle. The breath no longer holds tension. You feel what it's like to simply be, without needing to justify your existence through productivity, performance, or perfection. Non-duality isn't a state you reach. It's the truth that was already here before you started looking. The truth that becomes visible when you stop chasing, stop defining, stop fighting. It's not something added to you. It's what remains when the false divisions fall away. This awareness is soft, not dramatic. It meets every moment with openness, even confusion, even resistance. Nothing needs to be excluded, because in non-duality, even the struggle is part of the whole. Even the voice that says, "This is hard to grasp," is just another ripple in the same ocean. You don't need to force understanding. You don't need to make the ego disappear. You just need to notice that the ego too is a movement in awareness. And that awareness has no edge, no boundary, no preference. It simply holds everything. The thought of being behind, the desire to improve, the fear of being judged, all seen, all allowed, all returned to the space that never left. This recognition grows quietly, not through argument, not through intensity, but through repeated soft seeing, through gentle inquiry, through choosing again and again to return to the breath, to the body, to the presence that asks nothing but attention. And in that attention, the internal war begins to fade, not because one side won, but because the battlefield itself disappears. So tonight, let the idea of who you should be dissolve. Let the effort to perfect yourself melt. Let every version of self fall away just for a moment, and feel what remains. This breath, this silence, this awareness, holding it all. You are not split. You are not lacking. You are not two selves at war. You are this wholeness, this openness, this now. And from this now, the path continues, not in search of something new, but in the return to what was never separate to begin with. When the illusion of separation begins to dissolve, when the internal war between who you are and who you thought you needed to become starts to lose its grip, a deeper kind of stillness becomes possible. No longer pulled apart by duality, the mind starts to settle into the reality of what is. But in this stillness, something old often rises. A sharp memory, a decision you can't undo, words you wish you never said, a silence you wish you'd broken, regret, not just as a thought, but as a feeling that clings like a shadow, repeating the same loop in different disguises. It isn't always loud, but it's persistent. And even after you've released judgment, even after you've rested in presence, regret can sit quietly in the background, convincing you that one moment in the past has the power to cancel your wholeness in the present. But it doesn't. Buddhism does not treat regret as an enemy, nor does it dismiss it with clichés or quick comfort. It approaches regret as a teacher, as a doorway, not one to be ignored, but one to be entered with care. Because regret, when held with awareness, transforms. It stops being a chain and becomes a compass. It stops being a punishment and starts pointing toward growth, clarity, and even compassion. But for that to happen, you have to meet it fully. You have to stop pushing it down. You have to stop trying to solve it with self-blame or numb it with distraction. The pain of regret often comes from the story that what happened shouldn't have happened. The mind spins in circles saying, "I should have known better," or "if only I'd done things differently." But from a Buddhist perspective, this is where suffering hides, not in the past itself, but in the resistance to the past. The belief that something is fundamentally wrong because it cannot be undone. The path out of suffering begins not by rewriting history, but by turning toward it with a different lens. That lens is impermanence. One of the most essential teachings in Buddhism. Everything changes, every moment arises and passes away. And regret, when seen through this truth, begins to soften. You start to understand that the person who made that mistake, who said that thing, who made that choice, was not who you are now. Not better or worse, just different. They were shaped by conditions, by habits, by pain you may not have been fully aware of at the time. This is not an excuse, it's context. And context is what allows you to move from guilt to understanding. Understanding does not erase consequences. It does not undo harm, but it opens the heart to compassion. To recognize that all beings, yourself included, are learning, stumbling, growing through trial and error. The self that erred was trying in its own limited way to cope, to belong, to feel safe. And when you see this, something shifts. You stop being the judge and become the witness. You stop punishing yourself and begin to care for the part of you that hurt others from its own confusion. One of the most powerful practices in this transformation is metta, loving kindness meditation, especially when directed inward. Instead of replaying the moment with shame, you sit quietly and bring to mind the version of you who made the mistake. Not to justify, but to offer kindness, to say, "I see you. You were lost. You were scared, and you were still trying." You breathe with that version of yourself. You allow space for sadness, for grief, even for disappointment. but without judgment. And in that space, healing begins. Another practice is confession, not in the religious sense, but in the Buddhist tradition of open acknowledgement. It can be done in private or with a teacher or spiritual friend. You name the action. You see its impact. You express remorse. Not to beg for forgiveness, but to take full responsibility without self-condemnation. This practice is powerful because it breaks the secrecy of regret. It brings it into the light. And what is brought into the light begins to lose its power. Buddhism also teaches sila, ethical living, not as a rule book, but as a path to peace. When regret arises, it often points to a place where you acted out of alignment with your deeper values. Instead of turning that into guilt, you use it as guidance. You ask, how can I live more clearly now? What truth was ignored then that I can honor today? Regret becomes a teacher, not a wound, a reminder of the kind of person you want to be, not a verdict on who you are. Mindfulness plays a central role in this healing, because often regret is not about the event. It's about the thoughts that replay it over and over. How could I be so stupid? I ruined everything. These thoughts are not the voice of truth. They are the echoes of unprocessed pain. When you sit in mindfulness, you notice these thoughts without fusing with them. You say, here's that thought again, and you breathe. You don't fight it. You don't feed it. You just watch. And slowly, it starts to lose its sharpness. One of the most liberating shifts comes when you realize that you are allowed to change without hating who you were. Growth does not require self-punishment. Transformation is not earned through shame. In fact, shame often keeps the wound stuck. You can regret an action without rejecting the actor. You can take responsibility without building your identity around your worst moment. This is the path from penance to presence. Presence is the medicine regret longs for, because regret pulls you into the past, into a version of reality that no longer exists. Presence says, come back, right here, this breath, this step, this choice. Not to forget the past, but to choose differently now, again and again. Because wholeness isn't about erasing mistakes, it's about including them in a story that keeps evolving. A story that says, even that moment became part of the path. The Buddha himself taught that anyone can change, that no one is locked into their past, that karma is not a sentence, it is movement. What matters is how you respond now. The more fully you meet regret with compassion and awareness, the more your future begins to reflect that care. You no longer live from the shadow. You live from the clarity that the shadow taught you. And sometimes that clarity leads you to take action, to apologize, to repair, not to erase the past, but to bring love into the places that once lacked it. And even if the other person never forgives you, even if the door never reopens, your intention to make amends becomes part of your healing, because regret isn't healed through control, it's healed through sincerity. Another powerful insight from Buddhism is the emptiness of identity. You are not a fixed self. You are not the sum of your mistakes. You are not frozen in one moment. You are a living process, ever changing. And this means that redemption is not a dramatic event. It is a continuous practice. Every breath is an opportunity to return, to respond, to care. This doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering differently. Not as a trauma, but as a turning point. Not as proof of failure, but as the beginning of deeper honesty. When you stop hiding your regret, it becomes something sacred. It teaches you how to listen more closely, how to speak more truthfully, how to live with a little more gentleness for yourself and others. So tonight, let regret rise if it must. But meet it not with shame, not with fear, but with warmth. Let it speak, let it be seen, and then let it be held, not by punishment, but by presence. You are not your past. You are this moment, this breath, this awareness, learning to hold the weight of yesterday with the hands of compassion. And from these hands, the path continues, not toward erasing, but toward integrating. Not to undo what cannot be undone, but to live today in such a way that yesterday no longer defines the horizon. After learning to face regret not with shame, but with gentle presence, after realizing that even the most painful mistakes can be softened by awareness, what remains is something quieter. The drama begins to fade, the striving begins to slow, the stories lose their urgency, and what's left is this moment. Not a breakthrough, not a revelation, just the sound of the breath, the weight of the body on the floor, the feeling of being alive without needing to be anyone else. This is where many overlook the path, because the mind is trained to search for meaning in the extraordinary. It chases peak experiences, waiting for some thunderous shift to signal transformation. But in Buddhist practice, the deepest peace is not found in the heights. It's found in the simplicity we keep stepping over, the ordinary moments we forget to see. This forgetting is not failure. It's habit. The habit of rushing, of assuming that the real life is just around the next corner. That peace will arrive once the dishes are done, the inbox is cleared, the big insight is had. But wholeness doesn't live in tomorrow. It's not hiding in a perfect version of yourself. It's here, in the water running over your hands, in the warmth of tea before the first sip, in the moment you stand at the door and pause before stepping outside. These are not distractions from the path. They are the path. Buddhist mindfulness teaches that when attention is returned to the present, not with effort, but with care, everything becomes practice. Not in a rigid way, not in a checklist of mindful things to do, but in a soft turning toward what is already here. You don't need to climb a mountain to find the sacred. You only need to stay with what you're doing long enough to actually feel it. Folding laundry becomes a kind of prayer. Each piece touched with awareness, the fabric soft in your hands, the breath moving slowly as you work, not rushing to finish, not escaping into thoughts, but just being there. And in that being, something strange and beautiful happens. You feel connected, whole, not because the task is special, but because you are finally in it. Washing dishes becomes an act of presence, the temperature of the water, the weight of the plate, the quiet repetition, the absence of hurry. There is no enlightenment to earn here, just the fullness of this moment, seen without distraction. And in that seeing, the mind stops resisting life. It stops searching for something else. It lands. Walking slowly without a destination becomes a meditation. Each step an arrival. Each movement a reminder that life is not elsewhere. You stop walking to get somewhere. You walk to feel the ground, to notice the way your arms swing, to hear the sounds around you. This isn't mystical, it's ordinary. But when met with mindfulness, the ordinary becomes luminous. The mind resists this simplicity. It says, "That can't be enough." It wants meaning in big gestures, in impressive insights. But meaning is not missing. It's just buried beneath the habit of looking too far ahead. Mindfulness returns you, not to a better version of life, but to life itself. There is something healing about remembering this, because most of our suffering doesn't come from the moment. It comes from the stories about the moment, the thoughts about what should be happening, the pressure to be more productive, more evolved, more enlightened. But when you return to what's actually here, the pressure loosens. The moment doesn't ask you to be anyone. It just asks that you be present. Even in pain, this practice offers refuge, not because mindfulness makes pain disappear, but because it allows you to hold it differently, to feel the breath moving in and out, even as the body aches, to notice the sounds around you, even as the heart feels heavy. Presence doesn't require perfection, it only requires willingness. Eating becomes different too. Not just a function of survival, but a ritual of care. You taste more. You chew slower. You notice how the body receives nourishment. The meal becomes less about distraction and more about honoring your needs, even if it's simple, even if it's quiet. Mindfulness, in ordinary moments, reconnects you to time, not clock time, but felt time. When you're truly present, 5 minutes can feel full, rich, like you lived something real. And when you're distracted, whole hours can pass without any sense of connection. The gift of mindfulness is that it gives your time back, not by making life bigger, but by bringing you closer to it. This closeness changes how you relate to yourself. You begin to notice when you're rushing through your day without really living it. You catch yourself reaching for your phone, not because you need it, but because you've lost touch with the moment. And instead of judging, you return, again and again. This is not about perfection, it's about returning. Mindfulness is the art of remembering to come back. Even conversations become more whole when you bring this presence. You stop listening to reply. You start listening to hear. You notice the tone in someone's voice, the look in their eyes, the pauses between words, and suddenly connection deepens. Not through what is said, but through how fully you're there to receive it. This awareness doesn't make life easier, but it makes it fuller. It doesn't remove sadness or joy or frustration. It allows you to experience them without numbing or exaggerating. It brings you home to the body, to the breath, to the moment that never left, but that you had forgotten how to feel. Even rest becomes different. Not the kind of rest that is just collapse after exhaustion, but real rest. The kind where you lie down without a screen, without noise, where you let the body soften, let the thoughts pass, let yourself be held by the moment without needing to explain or achieve anything. The most beautiful thing about ordinary mindfulness is that it asks for nothing new. You don't have to change your life, You don't have to fix your habits. You just have to meet what's already here with a little more attention, a little more care. And that small shift opens everything. Because when you're present with the small things, you start to realize there are no small things. Every moment is complete. Every breath is the whole of life, arriving and leaving. And when you feel that, even just once, you know that awakening is not somewhere else. It's here, in the tea, in the dishes, in the quiet walk around the block. So tonight, let the day be enough. Let the breath be enough. Let the simple act of being here be your practice, not to become anything, but to feel what it means to already be whole. And from that wholeness, the path continues, not towards something bigger, but towards something closer, something so familiar we forget to see it. But once we do, we realize, this is it. It always was. After discovering the quiet richness of the ordinary, after realizing that drinking tea and folding laundry with full awareness can feel more whole than 1,000 ungrounded dreams, something else begins to emerge, almost without trying. A gentle shift in how you see others. The stranger who walks past you, the voice on the phone, the person who cuts in line, the loved one you've misunderstood. Your presence, once turned inward, now starts to extend outward. Not as effort, but as a natural unfolding. The same tenderness that allowed you to feel the warmth of your own breath begins to meet the world. And something profound takes place. The line between you and others starts to blur. The idea of a separate self begins to melt. And from that melting, compassion rises, not just as a moral virtue, but as a return to wholeness. Buddhist teachings often begin with self-awareness, but they don't stop there. The path opens wider. It shows that inner peace is not complete until it includes others, that the walls we build inside are the same walls we see outside. And the moment we let go of protecting and defending the small idea of me, we begin to feel the suffering and beauty of the world as our own. This is not metaphor. It's a shift in perception, one that dissolves isolation and reveals a deeper truth. No one heals alone. Compassion is not pity. It is not superiority. It is the clear, open willingness to meet the pain of others without turning away. And that turning toward the pain of others does something unexpected. It begins to heal our own, because much of our inner split comes from disconnection, from the belief that we are alone in our struggles, from the habit of comparing instead of connecting. But when compassion flows outward, that illusion weakens. You feel what another feels, and something in you softens. Something unites. This is where loving kindness, metta, practice becomes more than a meditation technique. It becomes a doorway to unity. You begin by offering phrases to yourself. May I be safe. May I be well. And then you offer them to someone you love, then to someone neutral, then to someone difficult, and then to all beings everywhere, not to fix them, but to include them. And each time you do, something in you becomes less divided, less guarded, more whole. There's a paradox in compassion. The more you give it away, the more full you feel, because the giving is not a depletion. It's a recognition. You see yourself in others. Their anger echoes yours. Their joy lifts you. Their suffering no longer feels foreign. And as this awareness deepens, You start to care in ways you didn't expect, not as duty, but as response. The same way you would tend to your own wound, you begin to tend to theirs. This dissolves the subtle self-centeredness that often hides in spiritual practice. The tendency to turn inward for comfort, but forget that suffering doesn't stop at the skin. Wholeness is not something you build around yourself. It's something you discover when the boundaries drop, and compassion is what drops them, not just as an emotion, but as a way of seeing. Even brief moments of this shift can change you, holding the door open and truly seeing the person behind you, noticing the sadness in a cashier's eyes and silently wishing them well, offering patience when someone disappoints you, not because they deserve it, but because you know what it's like to fall short. These aren't grand acts, they're small revolutions. Each one weakens the false divide between self and other. In difficult relationships, this view becomes especially powerful. The instinct is to protect, to blame, to hold grudges that harden over time. But compassion says, "Can I see their pain, even if they caused mine?" This doesn't mean accepting harm. It means refusing to carry hatred. It means letting empathy free you from the role of victim or villain, because both roles are heavy, and compassion lifts them by reminding you, everyone is learning, everyone is trying, even when they fail. This doesn't make compassion easy. It requires strength. The strength to stay open when it would be safer to close. The strength to listen when your ego wants to speak. But each time you choose compassion, the mind becomes less reactive. The heart becomes less afraid. And the gap between you and others narrows until it's no longer there. This practice doesn't require special training. It requires attention. It begins when you pause before responding, when you ask, what's really happening in them, before taking things personally. It deepens when you stop needing to win, when you stop needing to be right, when you remember that the person in front of you is also carrying invisible burdens. Compassion also transforms how we carry our own past. When we see how often others are driven by pain, by fear, by misunderstanding, we begin to see how those same forces shaped our own mistakes. And this backward-looking compassion becomes forgiveness, not the passive kind, but the wise kind, the kind that sees clearly and still chooses to soften, to release, to move on without poison. Even strangers become teachers on this path. The loud neighbor, the grumpy driver, the person who says something cruel online. Instead of reacting, you practice, they must be suffering, and not just as an idea. You feel it. You hold their humanity in your awareness, even when their behavior is hard to accept, and this becomes a mirror. Because if you can do that for them, you can do it for yourself. The more you practice this way of being, the less you feel like a separate being moving through a cold world. You start to feel like part of something larger, not an idea, not a system, but a living web of experience. You see that your joy is not fully yours, nor is your pain, that we rise and fall together, even when we pretend we don't. And that wholeness is not private. It expands outward through the quality of your care. There are days when compassion will feel impossible, when your heart feels raw or closed. That too is okay. The practice continues. Sometimes the most compassionate thing you can do is not lash out, not deepen the harm, Just breathe. And in that restraint, in that quiet dignity, something begins to heal again. This kind of wholeness doesn't come from avoiding others. It comes from turning toward them with presence. With boundaries, yes, but also with curiosity. You don't have to understand everything. You just have to stop turning away. Stop dividing the world into me and them. And when that happens, something opens. Because when your care includes more than yourself, you start to feel larger, not in ego, but in essence. You start to feel that your heart has room for mistakes, for differences, for everything that makes being human difficult and beautiful at once. So tonight, let your awareness include one more person, someone you love, someone you struggle with, someone you'll never meet. Just hold them in the quiet of your breath, without needing anything to change, without needing them to be different. And feel what happens when you stop protecting your wholeness and start sharing it. And from that sharing, the path continues, not as solitude, but as connection, not as escape, but as a return to the web of life, where no one is truly separate, and love is not a performance, but a remembering. When compassion begins to include others, when the line between self and world dissolves through care rather than control, something deep inside loosens, not as a dramatic shift, but as a gentle unraveling of the need to keep everything tidy. You stop trying to fix everyone. You stop needing to perfect every part of your story. And in the silence that follows, there comes a quiet insight. Maybe things aren't meant to be finished in the way the mind demands. Maybe wholeness doesn't mean completion. Maybe the cracks, the missing pieces, the open-ended moments are not mistakes. Maybe they are invitations, not to fix, but to feel, not to seal, but to see. And this is where the wisdom of letting things be incomplete begins to unfold, not as a resignation, but as a sacred perspective. The Zen tradition offers a powerful way of seeing this truth through the lens of wabi-sabi, an aesthetic and a worldview that honors the beauty of things as they are, imperfect, impermanent, and incomplete. It isn't just about cracked pottery or weathered wood. It's about a way of living, a kind of perception that stops chasing perfection and begins to bow to what is naturally unfinished. In wabi-sabi, the chipped bowl doesn't lose its value, it gains character. The faded fabric isn't ruined, it tells a story. The silence between words holds more truth than the words themselves. The modern world teaches the opposite. Everything must be polished, completed, optimized. You're taught to finish what you start, improve what you have, and hide what doesn't look quite right. But the cost of that mindset is a constant inner pressure, a subtle war with reality. Because life is not clean. It unfolds with edges, with pauses, with interruptions. And the more you expect it to be complete and symmetrical, the more distant it feels. Letting things be incomplete doesn't mean abandoning responsibility. It means shifting your relationship to control. It means recognizing that some questions don't need answers right away, that some emotions don't resolve on schedule, that healing can remain in progress and still be valid. You stop rushing yourself through grief, through change, through uncertainty. You allow things to be in motion, and that allowing is what makes space for real peace. Wabi-sabi is not passive, it's deeply attentive. It notices the quiet marks of time. It honors the patina of wear. It welcomes the asymmetry of things that were never supposed to be even. In your own life, this looks like honoring your journey not just in highlights, but in pauses. It means accepting the unfinished parts of yourself with the same care you give to the parts that feel whole. The mind often wants closure. It wants the full circle, the complete narrative. But much of life resists that structure. Relationships evolve without clear endings. Goals shift halfway through. Questions remain open for years. And instead of treating this as failure, the wabi-sabi perspective treats it as natural, as beautiful, as real. It says, here is a life still unfolding, and that's exactly what makes it alive. There's tenderness in incompleteness, the kind that draws you closer, not because something is broken, but because it's honest. A handmade cup, slightly uneven, feels warmer to hold. A melody that ends unexpectedly lingers in the heart longer. A conversation that doesn't resolve leaves room for deeper listening. You start to see that incompleteness doesn't steal meaning, it makes it. This view also softens how you see your past. Not every chapter will have closure. Not every wound will offer a neat lesson. Some memories will remain open. Some regrets will echo faintly for years. But when you stop demanding resolution, you make room for integration. You let those moments be part of the story, not as shameful gaps, but as necessary openings. Even in spiritual practice, the desire to arrive can become a trap. You sit hoping for clarity. You meditate, expecting peace. And when it doesn't come in the way you imagined, the mind labels the session incomplete. But wabi-sabi reminds you that presence itself is enough. That showing up, that listening, that breathing with what is, even if it feels unfinished, is sacred. This way of seeing changes how you relate to others too. You stop waiting for them to become someone else. You stop holding them to a timeline they never agreed to. You begin to appreciate the beauty in who they are now, even with their contradictions, even with their gaps. You learn to love people the way you love old books, with worn edges, half-told stories, and fingerprints of real life on every page. Wabi-sabi also transforms your creativity. You stop over-editing. You stop polishing the soul out of things. You start trusting the imperfect line, the rough edge, the accidental brilliance. You realize that creativity is not about producing flawless outcomes. It's about revealing something true. And truth rarely arrives in perfect form. When applied to your daily routines, this awareness brings a kind of softness to your planning. Not everything will get done. Not every day will feel complete. Some tasks will linger. Some conversations will need to be revisited. And instead of treating this as failure, you begin to see it as rhythm, like waves, like seasons. Not everything has to close. Some things are meant to remain open. This perspective also offers healing for the inner critic, the part of you that measures, compares, pushes. When you recognize that incompleteness is part of the fabric of reality, not a flaw, but a feature, that critic loses its grip. You stop believing that your worth depends on perfection. You begin to live from a different center, one that trusts process over outcome. Even death is seen differently through this lens, not as the end of a perfect story, but as the natural close of a chapter that was never meant to be complete. The things left unsaid, the projects unfinished, the love that lingers. All of it becomes part of the mystery, not the mistake. you stop fearing the end as a place where you'll be judged and start meeting it as part of the same rhythm that shaped everything else. In practice, you can begin by noticing how much tension you carry trying to finish things, the frustration when a conversation doesn't conclude, the guilt when a project remains paused, the discomfort when your emotions don't match what you expected. Instead of reacting, breathe, stay, let the moment be unfinished, and feel how that spaciousness changes you. You might begin to notice the small signs of wabi-sabi in your life, the worn-out chair that still holds you, the chipped mug that holds your morning tea, the photo that's slightly faded but full of memory. Each one is whole, not despite its imperfections, but because of them. Let them remind you that you, too, are not waiting to be completed. You are already part of the whole, even as you unfold. Let your meditation practice carry this spirit. Let your relationships hold room for open ends. Let your art reflect the fingerprints of being human. Stop rushing. Start feeling. Start listening to what's already enough, even if it's still in progress. And tonight, let everything remain slightly open. Let the stories in your mind stop mid-sentence. Let your breath come and go without needing to control it. Let your thoughts drift without chasing them down. Let the unspoken be okay. Let the undone rest. Let the incomplete be your teacher. And from that incompleteness, the path continues, not toward finality, but toward deeper presence, not with answers, but with reverence for what remains unspoken, unsolved, and still entirely beautiful. After learning to live with the unfinished, after letting go of the pressure to wrap every story and complete every sentence, a new kind of peace starts to settle in. Not the peace of control, but the peace of allowing. The kind that doesn't depend on everything being fixed, solved, or resolved. And from this gentle acceptance, one begins to hear something underneath it all. A rhythm that never asked for perfection. A movement that has always been here. The breath. Not as an idea, not as a technique, but as a living thread that runs through every experience, holding the present moment together without effort, without needing attention, and yet offering everything when noticed. This is where the practice returns to its root. Not in concepts, not in theories, but in breath itself, the one thing that is always now. Buddhism has always pointed to the breath as the doorway back to what's real, not because breath is special, but because it's honest. It doesn't lie, it doesn't pretend. It rises, it falls, it comes, it goes. It doesn't care if you're enlightened or confused. It welcomes you the same way, whether you're grieving or celebrating. And when everything else becomes noisy, when the mind spins in loops and the heart feels tangled, the breath remains simple, close, true. And that simplicity is the beginning of returning home. Mindful breathing is not about controlling the breath. It's not about making it deeper or quieter or more spiritual. It's about becoming aware of what is already happening. The inhale, the exhale, the pause in between, the body rising, the body falling. This is life, unfiltered. This is you, without the added story. And when you bring attention here to this quiet movement, something begins to shift. Not because the breath changes, but because you begin to notice what you've been missing. You've been breathing all your life, But how many of those breaths have you actually felt? How many have passed unnoticed, drowned out by thoughts, distractions, and obligations? Mindful breathing is the practice of reclaiming those moments, of saying, "I am here now, and that is enough." The breath doesn't demand effort. It invites trust. It doesn't ask you to perform. It simply asks you to return. This return is powerful because when the breath becomes your anchor, you no longer drift as easily. You stop being carried away by every fear, every desire, every old story that tries to pull you out of the present. The breath brings you back, not just to your body, but to your life, to the place where reality is actually happening, not in the past, not in the future, but here. One of the most beautiful things about breathing as practice is its accessibility. It doesn't require a temple, it doesn't require silence, it doesn't require time you don't have. You can come home to your breath anywhere, in the middle of a meeting, in line at the store, while washing dishes. It travels with you, it never leaves, and each time you notice it, even for a moment, you step out of the trance. You return to the moment that is always enough. Over time, this returning becomes a rhythm. You begin to live more from the breath than from reactivity. You notice when you've left yourself, when you're caught in anger, in judgment, in panic, and instead of being swept away, you pause. You feel the inhale, you ride the exhale, you soften your grip on needing to control, and in that softening, clarity returns, not as something you chase, but as something that was waiting underneath. Breathing mindfully also reconnects you with your body. Many live in their thoughts and only visit the body when something goes wrong. But the breath brings you back to the chest, to the belly, to the place where life moves silently, rhythmically. You begin to notice how emotion shows up in the breath, how anxiety makes it shallow, how peace deepens it, how grief shakes it. The breath becomes not just a practice, but a language, a way your body tells the truth, even when your mind tries to hide. In this listening, compassion grows. You stop demanding that your breath always be calm. You let it be ragged when it needs to be. You let it be sharp when you're afraid. You let it be barely there when sadness is heavy. And instead of fixing it, you accompany it. You sit with it like a friend. And this presence is what begins to heal, not by changing the breath, but by changing your relationship with it. This practice also reveals the truth of impermanence. No breath lasts, each one ends, and yet another always comes. This rhythm teaches trust. It teaches letting go. You don't cling to the inhale. You don't resist the exhale. You allow, and this allowing begins to seep into the rest of your life. You let go of conversations when they're over. You let go of identities when they no longer serve. You let go of control when it's time to surrender. The breath teaches all of this, not in words, but in feeling. And the more you trust the breath, the less you need to rush. You stop pushing for answers. You stop grabbing for control. You breathe and let things unfold, because now you've felt the steadiness underneath it all. You know how to return, even when life is messy, even when emotions are loud, even when the path feels unclear. This returning can become the foundation of everything. You start your day with the breath, not your phone. You meet challenges with the breath, not just opinions. You fall asleep in its rhythm rather than in worry. The breath becomes not just a tool, but a home, a reminder that you belong to this moment, no matter what it holds. And perhaps most quietly, the breath reminds you that nothing is missing. The mind loves to tell stories of lack, of what's wrong, of what's needed before you can rest. But the breath says otherwise. It says, this is enough. It says, you're alive. It says, stay here. And when you listen, even for a few seconds, you feel it, the completeness, the fullness, the presence that doesn't need anything added to be sacred. Breathing with awareness is not flashy. It won't impress anyone, but it will change you. Slowly, deeply, softly. It will make you more grounded, more kind, more present. It will show you that the moment you're in, this exact inhale, this exact exhale, is already whole, already home. So tonight, let everything else fade. Let every plan, every memory, every to-do fall to the background. And bring your attention to this breath, not as a method, not as a goal, but as a reunion, with now, with life, with the part of you that never left. And from that reunion, the path continues, not as a chase, but as a return, not toward some perfect future, but toward the pulse of life that is already beating in your chest, guiding you back again and again to where nothing is missing. After more than 3 hours of exploring the deepest corners of the human spirit, what's left is not a finish line. It's a beginning, a quiet, steady return to something that was never missing, only forgotten. Through each teaching, from self-compassion to silence, from breath to incompleteness, you've seen that wholeness is not something you earn, chase, or fabricate. It's what remains when you stop running, when you stop editing yourself to fit into perfection, when you stop dividing your heart into should be and shouldn't be. The Dharma has never asked you to become more. It has only ever invited you to come home. Each topic, each breath, each pause was not a lesson in fixing yourself, but in remembering yourself. That the broken parts are still sacred, that the pauses are part of the rhythm, that you don't need to be finished to be whole, and that compassion for yourself, for others, is not just a soft virtue, but a doorway through which separation dissolves. Wholeness is not loud. It doesn't arrive with applause. It arrives quietly, like an exhale, in the softness of ordinary things, in the decision to stay, in the moment you listen to your own breath and say, "This is enough." If something in these hours touched you, if a line, a silence, a moment gave you something you didn't expect, let us know in the comments. Share what stayed with you. It's in these reflections that others find their way too. And if you want more teachings like this, gentle, honest, rooted in practice, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell. That way, you'll never miss a moment of clarity, even when life feels chaotic. You are already whole, not because you finished this, but because somewhere along the way, you stopped trying to be anything else. Let that be the feeling you fall asleep to tonight. Let that be the truth you wake up with tomorrow.